I do that. I have little add-ons. I run out.
Well, you got me for what, 20 minutes?
Yeah.
My title is Return.
Yeah.
I missed Return.
Vision of efficiency.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Hit him again.
You're not gonna let it go.
No, I was talking about that.
All right, I think we're gonna get started here, folks. It's about 9 o'clock, almost everyone's here. Missing one.
Dennis isn't going to be here today. I usually so other than Dennis, that's the only one.
Okay. Ellen is very late.
All right, so, welcome. Everybody have a good break?
Yeah, great.
Break? I know, great question mark. Everybody have good start to the new year. I want to take just a couple minutes real quick. We're going to do just a little with the so groups of 3. So you 3, you 3, you 3. Nick to Nick.
No nickels around.
Mark Sandwich, Effie to Jennifer, Jason to Lauren. Just talk about what you're excited for in the new year. Just take a couple minutes.
What are you excited? Karen, what are you excited for?
I haven't figured that out.
Doesn't feel like a new year.
There's still too much crap going on.
So after 22 years, and that's what we invested in the last year was tough. It's been 4 years, it's been 1 year. Excited, guys. Excited, guys. So, the upper part that's Is that out of there just?
Wait a minute.
Which is amazing. What are you excited about for the new year? Anybody want to share out?
Now it's quiet.
David's got a lot of traffic. He's going places.
All right, where are you going?
I'll leave Friday for Japan.
Oh, cool. Oh, you're getting out here before the cold, huh?
Are you skiing?
The second week I'm there, I'll ski. First week is cool.
Very
First
cool.
week is white.
Very jealous. Yeah.
Nice.
Everything revolves around water, right? You're either skiing or fishing. Or rafting.
Or surfing.
And eating, don't forget eating.
Anybody else have travel? Excited to travel? Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
going to Puerto Rico, speaking of surfing in February. Yeah,
Very nice.
hopefully the biggest snowstorm of the year, I'll be gone.
Yeah, you gotta time that, right?
I'm happy to have the snow.
I get excited because I'm going to Florida a couple weeks and a couple weeks after that to Arizona. I try to get out in the winter beforehand. And then I think we have Boston and New York City towards the end of the year, so it's. I'm excited because I'm listening to my folks here and they're talking about long-range planning in the cities and that's exciting because it's fun to see our cities grow and hearing what these guys are talking about, it makes me excited, especially living really close to Windsor. It's awesome to hear about that.
You should have been at a meeting on September about growth, seeing where cities grow, and the guy that harassed us about growth.
Yeah, we had a water education series meeting where we were talking about, water use and conservation and, got some folks in the audience who were very anti-growth. Which, you're allowed to have an opinion, but you gotta have engaging dialogue about it, which didn't really happen.
Productive.
And then further harassment after the event, so.
Wow.
But-
During the event.
Anyone else want to share out what they're excited for?
I have a senior graduating high school, so.
Ooh, exciting.
Sounds expensive.
No, she's good, she's got a lot of scholarships. Go girl.
That's so exciting.
I don't know if exciting was the right word to use, but it was announced yesterday that our executive director is leaving.
Oh, my God.
23rd, so 24 will be spicy, extra spicy now.
How long was that person in?
Kendall was there for 2 years.
Are they doing a national search or?
Hasn't been announced yet, but wouldn't be surprised.
Does that have anything to do with that unfortunate announcement about water rates?
That may or may not have been a contributing factor.
Well, I'm guessing.
Practice your PIO work, man.
So I buried my laptop today, I apologize in advance.
Guess that wasn't 100% his choice.
Wow,
It certainly didn't help the case, let's put it that way.
yeah, interesting. Any other exciting or eventful news for 2024?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to be a granddad for the first
I've heard that grandparenting is way better than parenting.
Oh, yes.
It's a different level.
Which I'm in the midst of the two-year-old phase, and my mom is like, Yeah.
Yeah, to be agreed.
From experience, I will tell you this, one of the comments I made to our daughters was, I wish there was a way you could figure skip being a parent for Rector's grant. And they're like, what?
So Jessica has a high school graduate, I have a granddaughter graduating from high school.
Oh, yeah.
We're gonna go visit colleges, grandma and grandpa are going, we must be paying for something. We must be paying.
Yes. The other benefits of being a grandparent.
Yeah, it's great.
Which ones are you visiting?
Grandparenting is great.
Yes, it is.
Which ones are you visiting? Where's she
She's
visiting?
going to Grand Canyon, we're going to Grand Canyon this weekend. That's where she's gonna go. It's only gonna be 40 down in Phoenix this weekend. It's 2 here, but.
Yeah.
Forty's gonna go there.
Already walking around.
It's gonna be like 2 to them. That's seriously.
All right, well, before we get started here, I wanted to also just recap. So last session, back in December, we heard a lot from different municipalities all across the region. Couple of the comments you all made in the homework assignment was like, wow, everyone is on their own, doing these separate strategies. There's a little bit of conversation, but not much. And everyone recognizes that collaboration is very important, but how do we increase that and build more regional approaches and solutions, which I think everyone's kind of grappling with at this point. But that was a very common theme. Another one was, just the piece of like, well, first in time, first in right, cities like Greeley, pretty set up, doing pretty well for the future, right? Cities like Wellington, newer cities that are small, they don't have a lot of resources, they're growing very quickly. How do they, stack up? How do they build their water future? And it's really challenging. And it brings in this equity piece of like, Greeley developed first, they have a lot of water, Wellington didn't, so a lot of you, I think, are also grappling with that. Any thoughts or anyone want to add to that topic?
I'll go back to the book that we did our report on last time, and a component of that book was exactly what you mentioned about regional issues and partnering, because when it was talking about some California areas, and they had multiple other issues, but a lot of it was groundwater pumping and aquifer usage and salinity from the sea leaching into some of the groundwater due to the aquifer. And it was very interesting for that component, but it was interesting to hear some of the collaboration with some of the towns and areas, but yet the book really singled out one community that did not come along, and eventually they were almost forced to. I think they couldn't sit on the sidelines very long and just continue to say, your problem, not ours, things like that. They were forced to come along and join the party, so to speak. So it's interesting to hear the same type of things in the Front Range area, and it kind of makes me wonder, history, repeats itself. And so that was in our book that we read, and it'll be interesting to see what happens along here.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what happens as well. Like, will there be some coming together, combining efforts in some way? I don't know. It'd be great. Like, let's make a model or look to other regions that have done this. Yeah, Julie.
Oh, I was telling Deb this morning, that after hearing last session, I saw our former Mayor Tom Norton at an event, this past weekend. And when I was coming to Gara, this was in 13, 14, somewhere around in that, City of Greeley was gonna be upping development fees, and of course the builders are up in arms and that type of thing. So we kind of had a meeting with him, and the city had come and it given all these breakdowns of all the cities around us, and it was kind of like, well, this is just what we have to do, and we're gonna have to deal with it, and whatever. Well, after last, I told Deb, I said, I saw Tom and I went up to him and I said, I get it now, I understand it now, and why we do it. it's not necessarily, I know, but I think of the other cities and how it's hard for them and whatnot, but it gave me a better understanding. And so I'm really thankful for that, and to be able to then, to go to my group of people as realtors and those people, and to hopefully help them to continue to understand that. I think that's the education piece of, we just gotta keep helping one person at a time to understand what that is. And hopefully as we all go forward, we're spreading that information and helping to educate.
Yeah, definitely. Mhm. And help inform some of the solutions as well. Yeah, Laura.
In regard to all this and back to the guy at the water series session that was anti-growth.
Yeah.
I guess, and the fact that Wellington, it seemed like it wasn't well thought out planned growth. And so why allow that type of growth? And to me, I just wonder, like, and maybe this is an education piece, what is the reason for all of this growth? If are people really like pro growth, and is it just the money? Is it because it makes things cheaper? I don't fully understand. That's my perspective, because I'm not anti-growth, but I'm not like, let's do this and like develop it all.
I think part of it, look to the west. When you all look out your window, what do you see? I think that's why people would love to be here. It's a beautiful place. I mean, you come and you visit and people are just stunned at what it looks like. Not right now, but. But I mean, the rest of the.
I mean, I understand why people want to move here, but like,
There's so much.
shouldn't there be some limit to that?
Yeah, that's true.
Me, a New Yorker.
You have to talk about what growth is.
Right.
Where it's coming from.
How you do.
Everybody thinks it's people moving in. What was it? I can't remember what year that was, the state, the growth report. Is it 50% of the growth is coming, people moving in, 50% of the growth, projected growth by 2050 is our kids staying here.
Yeah.
So, you're gonna have growth no matter which way you go.
So I'm just gonna dovetail into this conversation and say, thanks, David, for being here with me, but there need to be a lot more planners in this room learning this stuff.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, like, having planned in many other states and other regions and other countries, water is not as big of a concern in other places. You poke a hole in the ground and bam, you have water. This series is about water, but we're talking about growth. So if you're having babies, you're growing. You know what I mean? That's the fact. Mortality, fertility, I mean, these are all factors, and migration, these are all factors in growth. And so when you talk to the state demographer's office, there are all these reasons why people move here. Fact of the matter is, we're growing as an organism, as a human civilization, we're growing here. And so we've got to find a way and places for all our people to live. Kids can't live in houses that you first bought. My kid's never going to be able to buy my first house. And I just bought my first house 5 years ago, and I'm not a young lady, you know what I mean? So there's so many factors involved in that, and I think that there's so many, and for those of you who don't know what all planners do, you're not the only ones. We're this weird thing that does a lot. We have our hands in everything, but to understand the interplay with water, we always hear, it's like a tagline, affordable housing wants your tap fees waived. Okay. But you gotta drill down to the root of why that is. The tap fees are so expensive because the water system's so expensive because the drops of water are sold on an open market, which also doubles kind of the cost. I mean, it's layers of an onion, and it is stinky. I mean, I'm gonna relate it to an onion. But I think that the fact that there's certain people who are involved in this process and these decisions that are made, or that recommendations are made to city or town council members for a particular development because it interplays well with our comp plan. A lot of our comp plans aren't interplayed with our water plans. There's very few cities and towns in the state that really tie those things. I think we heard about an annexation south. Actually, if you think about Colorado Springs kind of hugging the city of Fountain with an annexation, and they said no. because that annexation would have overextended their water supplies beyond their policy rates, which they wanted to have 130%, kind of water supply, both for their current and future growth. And so, I mean, Greeley's kind of set up rural sweet, because they got like 130,000% for there, but they're set up to where they can plan that growth. You know, but what I'm learning in this town is your growth is as tight as your water supply is.
Yeah, I mean,
And
you
growth
said
water.
something about how, you know, their water plan isn't necessarily matched with their development planning, but
Doesn't that blow your mind?
It's getting, so there are
every
many
time I see a new
efforts.
development, I'm like, where's the water coming from?
And it is, there's availability in this, but I'm talking long range, like buckets of water in this state and how far can we stretch them? Where can we stretch them to? It's more comprehensive than what we're talking about right now is it's very piecemeal. And so we do it very piecemeal. We look at our own little supply and we say, yeah, we can do this for this long and we're comfortable with that. And we look at hundreds and hundreds of years of lifetimes of water supplies to make sure that we're not gonna have any situation with California's in right now. But at the same time, if we looked at it in a bigger picture, we're all kind of sucking out of the same buckets. And we don't know what everybody else is doing all the time, you know? So, you know, it needs to be way more comprehensive than it is. And the state does as good of a job as it can, but we're shaking and moving and grooving faster than everybody can keep up. Sorry.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So, yeah, this is interesting. So I'm gonna give the next presentation, but I'm an ag guy, but 10 years ago, I was invited to a group called the South Platte Regional Opportunities Water Group. And so it was Denver Water, Aurora Water, South Metro, Northern Colorado Water Conservancy
This is
District.
the sprawl.
The SPROG group, did you have somebody talk about that? Okay, Lisa talked about it.
Yep.
Oh, good.
Last session.
Yeah, because that's one of the things where we're
Yeah.
trying to do it more regionally, and we look at this area up here, we call it the hot zone, maybe she told you that, so, you know, Frederick, Firestone, Wellington, Windsor, Severance, all these towns up here, as a way of providing some water for that purpose, and really tapping in and making the regionally a little better plan, and working together to do that. It becomes hard in Colorado just because each municipality or each area has their own water right. And now you're trying to combine, and most of these things, maybe the way you make it more efficient is with different storage buckets in critical locations or water treatment plants or things like that, more than this is my water right. We can add some new water to that, but we are talking about things like that on a bigger scale. It's just cumbersome and long. When you talk to Denver Water and Aurora Water, they have different ideas, different objectives, and they hold their cards really close to their vest, and they have plans, but I'm going after that water over here, and they don't want anybody to know, and so it's really, it's hard. We've tried to take off, I'm the ag guy, we have a couple of ag guys in there, but, we try to take off our individual hats and think more community oriented, big picture focused, and I think it's helped a lot. But we've been talking about it for 10 years and we've had turnover of these people.
Yeah.
And so I've been there the whole time, and one other guy's been there, and everybody else has had managers that turn over, and then you have to get trust built up and all these kind of things, and it's just pretty darn cumbersome.
Yeah, sorry, Lauren. did you-
No, I'm sorry, I totally interrupted you. You were gonna say something.
No, I don't know what I was saying. Yeah, Nick.
One of the things I've been thinking about a lot since the last session is the Wellington case study. And the civics nerd inside of me really is curious how you recover as a city once you've gotten yourself into that situation. And she touched on it a little bit in terms of like their decade out forecasting, but from a budget perspective, it's gonna hurt your commercial growth, it's gonna hurt your residential growth. How do you recover financially from that and get back to sound footing as a city once you found yourself in that situation? Understanding that's a pretty rare example, I think, in a lot of ways, but I think there are so many communities in northern Colorado that are growing so rapidly that it's not unlikely that another community could find itself in that situation again. So how do you prevent it? I think the growth conversation, but if it's happened, like a Wellington, where it seems like it just came on so fast, they went, oh crap, but the next thing you know, it's been 5 years and they've doubled and tripled in size. How do you recover from that?
And they've got, 2 staff people who are like
Yeah.
doing 20 different jobs,
Right.
yeah.
Because
They
my
don't have the
slight
water
challenge,
Oh, no.
No.
Right.
my slight challenge to what you're saying is I didn't get the sense that anybody in Wellington made an active decision to grow or not grow.
Right.
It just
happens.
Well, yeah, you talk about the people along the corridor of I-25. What we're seeing out in our area, and I'm 120 miles east of here, is the corridor here gets expensive, more expensive. You're driving people
Yeah.
further east, which drives those people further east. I mean, you look at Kingsburg, which used to be just
Wiggins.
Wiggins, I mean, their growth, and they're in the South Platte Basin as well, and, they're struggling with that as well.
Yeah.
To grade, they have better options with ag water purchases than some of these areas up here. See, the growth, it's a rippling effect. What happens up here is impacting us out here in the Front Range or the High Plains. I had never expected to see Akron rental rates sitting at $1,500-$1,600 a month. I mean, we're trying to recruit new people and we're going like,
Dang.
it's better than the 3,000 paying for college.
Yeah, and I remember what I was gonna say, there are efforts to, which we will hear about in our next session, which is focused on economic development. Sonoran Institute, I'm not sure if any of you I think some of you probably know about it. They have a program called Growing Water Smart. They do workshops with communities. They've targeted Colorado. That was their first location where they started doing this. But they bring the planners, they bring the utilities, they bring the city managers all together on a team and help them develop an action plan to better integrate water and land use planning. And they look at all the tools and strategies that are out there, what's feasible, what's not. So there's efforts out there, but it's slow going. And there's turnover and people have to then go through the program again and
What was the name of that institute, Karen?
The Sonoran Institute.
I just found that.
SONORAN Institute. I actually worked for them for like 10 years in Arizona. Yeah, Taylor.
I think something that I have found very interesting is that it seems like there's not, if you plan to go into utility or city planning or even the ag side, although I think we're probably hopefully gonna learn more about that today. There's not a lot of educational opportunities early on in people's careers, or in their education before they go into that, path. And part of it is like you were saying, like, if you're living in a different region and going to school for planning in a different region, it's not necessarily that big of a deal there. So it's interesting to see that, like, it's great that there's opportunities once you are in this, which, I mean, I guess I'm not really, once y'all are in it, like especially the municipal side. But how do we kind of backtrack that and start that earlier so that people go into these types of positions with some of that information already, instead of like learning halfway through your career, like, oh yeah, we should be thinking about water when we talk about city planning or when we move forward with this project, or like, it's an interesting thing. It kind of feels like we're sort of behind a little bit almost. And this is true in my industry also, like, it's a very water intensive industry and we realize that we're creating beer in a desert. And that's something that we've taken very seriously, but we're only 10 years old. Like, there's breweries who have been around. Colorado is a big brewery home, and for big, like 13 million barrels a year at the, like big organizations. And that, it seems like that should have been a thing for everybody earlier. Like, it's not a new issue, So it's just been kind of interesting to see. And like, I appreciate the programs like this exist, but like, none of us are at the very beginning of our career, right? Like, we're all in it in some way. And so I wish that there were more opportunities for earlier in people's time in the professional world to like really know about this issue before you get to the point where you're like, oh yeah, I wish we'd been thinking about that,
Yeah, you're
So it's
making
kind of
me
interesting.
think about, because we're you know, we have this program, Colorado Water Center does this. Water Education Colorado has a water fluency program. But it's making me think like, maybe we could just have a few like online modules that are available to everybody who wants it. And we let, you know, municipalities know, let anybody who wants it know. And they can choose to include that in like an orientation or something. It's like, hey, this is the reality of water in the state, and these are the really basic things you should know. So yeah, I think we can do more and build more partnerships to help fill that gap in need, because
Especially for folks coming from places where this isn't an issue.
yeah.
Because I think many people in this room have said that, right? Like acknowledge that that's maybe, like, I didn't think about that until now. And it's just an interesting thing here to hear that repeated so many times by like every presenter. It's like, well, we're trying to figure out how to incorporate that now or whatever. That's kind of weird.
I'm just quickly, when you said something about that, I think it's the empathy towards the planning from from somebody who doesn't do what a lot of you do in here. You know it's a big deal, but until you start into this, now you're I mean, Nick, when you were talking about that one thing, you're like, oh my God, I bet that was a lot of fun in your job, you know? But you don't see as your average Joe citizen, you don't realize all the back stuff and all the things that go into it. So I think it does, I feel like this program gives not only education, but the maybe towards looking at what the city and counties and how they plan and how they have to, and the jobs that these guys have to do.
Yeah.
It's almost unthinkable sometimes, but it's so needed. And so I think, yes, I love that we're gonna have you guys. I think you also see there's a part where you can, you can almost, like you said, a module down that the average citizen could hear and maybe get some of that to what goes into it without, because it really is eye-opening in that sense.
All right, well, we're gonna wrap up this conversation. I wanna make sure we have plenty of time for our speakers today. So we are transitioning from the municipal perspective and we're moving on to the agricultural perspective. So today is all about ag. We're gonna learn about ag overview. We're going to learn about some of the challenges of water efficiency in agriculture, some of the different alternative transfer methods and approaches that are trying to be used instead of buy and dry. I'm going to talk a little bit about salinity and the stakeholder group that both these guys actually are in. But I will introduce our first speaker here. I'm so excited to have Jim Yon travel all the way over here from Sterling.
It's not that far. My two grandsons live in Eaton, so I spent the night with my daughter and played with my grandsons this morning. I had a round table meeting last night, so it worked out.
Okay, good, so I don't feel so bad. So all right, let me give you a little background on Jim. So he's the general manager of the North Sterling and Pruitt reservoirs. He's held that position for more than 30 years. He was responsible for overseeing diversion and distribution of water to over 350 farmers. He's a registered engineer, got his BS in agricultural engineering from CSU. He used to work as a private consultant in Fort Collins. He's a native of Colorado. He grew up on a family ranch which used water from the North Sterling Reservoir system. In June of 2016, he was appointed by the governor to serve as the South Platte director and served for 5 years and 2 years as chair. He's been a member of the South Platte Basin Roundtable since 2005, which is when it was started. And he has served as Roundtable's representative to the Interbasin Compact Committee. He and his wife also, in their spare time, which I'm sure he has lots of, they farm and ranch and are the parents of 2 grown children, Hannah and Austin. So thank you very much, Jim.
All right, well, thanks. It's good to be here with you here this morning. Couple of things to start with. My son, who's a water resources engineer in South Denver, gave me a shirt for Christmas. It's an untucked shirt, and so If it's distracting, I'm sorry, usually I tuck everything.
That's good.
I feel kind of
Look
awkward.
good, it's all right. Very,
Yeah,
no reach.
he's trying to bring me.
Jeans and untucked shirt. Very good.
Okay. Well, I'm glad. If it's distracting, just put that in your evaluation. And then secondly, you talk about population growth. So I have 8 sisters and a brother. And we grew up in Northeast Colorado and so I'm one of the younger ones. So there were 35 nieces and nephews in our family. My 2 kids are part of that. And then those are growing up and having kids. So my grandson, who was just born last August, was number 93 of his generation. So I'm
Population growth.
part of the population problem. I decided to get into the water business, try to solve problems, but so sorry about that. But the good thing is, you know, we had only 1 bathroom on our ranch and 8 sisters. No shower. I didn't even know we had a bathroom until I was in junior high. But so I was part of the first water reuse program because that was like, you know, the hot water, you didn't have very much of it. So I was one of the younger ones. I was dunked in used water. So anyway, that's it. But so I'm with the North Sterling and Pruitt reservoirs, and I've been doing that. So it'll be 33 years in June. I did work for 5 years in Fort Collins, and I lived over on Boardwalk in apartments, and there was no stoplights from Boardwalk to I-25 when I lived there. And then we moved out kind of by Wellington, and there was in a farmhouse out there, and there was a pizza place there that we would drive to go get a pizza, and that was about all there was in Wellington, so it's quite a bit different in 33 years since I moved back home. So anyway, but I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about agriculture, and you know, you're gonna hear from a lot of people today that are pretty good in what they do, and I know most all of them. The water world is a pretty small world actually, and you get to know a lot of the people, and I've had the opportunity to do that with both municipal and environmental and a lot of different people. So I like hearing different opinions, and I like telling the agriculture story. And so that's what I'll do today. And of course, we're in the South Platte Basin. Of course, we're in the Poudre, which is a tributary to the South Platte. It drains all these areas up in here, goes right into, but the North Sterling Reservoir is right up in actually right here, that's Julesburg. North Sterling's right here and Pruitt's right down here. But it's part of a bigger basin called the Platte, and we have, of course, endangered species issues down in where the two come together. And Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska have worked in agreement with the Fish and Wildlife Service to recover those endangered species, but it affects the whole South Platte Basin. So that's where we are. And here's a couple of people that came here a long time ago. And of course, this is Zebulon Pike. Pike's Peak was named after him. It said these vast plains of Western Hemisphere may become in time equally celebrated with the sandy deserts of Africa. That was in 1806. So he's coming across the plains. And then of course, Stephen Long comes up here and he said a barren region unfit for the habitation of civilized man. And so that's in 1820. And so that's where we live. We're kind of uncivilized still, but this is what they saw when they came here. They saw a river with no trees. They saw a river that disappeared in the summertime after the snow melt came, and they thought it was just a desert. But water changes things. And so in Colorado, I like to show this because I talk about it a lot, and I'm known as Mr. Return Flow because I talk about the return flow so often because they're so important to us. But this is kind of in general how water developed in Colorado. So you have up on the Front Range here, along this area, of course, the first thing that came were miners. And they brought the idea of this prior appropriation from California, because in California, they were fighting over water there. And then some of the miners, the 49ers came into 59 in Colorado, and they had that same idea. So they were doing their sluice boxes and getting some gold, and all of a sudden there was no water, and they would look upstream, and this guy that came later took their water and started doing what they were doing, and they didn't think that was fair. So they said, they came up with this kind of unwritten rule that said, hey, whoever was there first gets the right to use that water. And if there's enough, then someone in another place can use it. So that's where we get this idea, first in time and first in right. But the miners needed to eat, and farmers came in this area, and some of the farmers made a lot of money just by feeding the miners. So they started to dig ditches off the river and take it and put it in their gardens or small farms, and they started irrigating. And they realized that, hey, you just add a little water, this is really productive land. And you can see that around this area. So in the 1860s, in general, you have water rights in the 1860s here. But in the summertime, after the snowmelt would go out, the river would actually become dry, clear, completely dry at Fort Morgan. So you still had 130 miles of river that really was non-existent in this July and August, the heat of the summer. But when these guys started using water, the ditches leaked, they came back, these guys saw some water. Hey, we have a more constant supply of water. So that in the 1870s, they developed water here, down into Fort Morgan, all the way to Sterling. You can see some 1870 water rights. And then you get down here, and we even have a compact with Nebraska, which I can touch on a little bit at the end, but it's at 1897 down there. So that's, in general, that's kind of how the river developed, and it was based on return flows back to the river. So just kind of how the South Platte developed was, first there were these direct ditches where they take water directly off the river, they apply it to their ground, and they would grow the crops. And then the state came up with bigger ideas like I'm part of 3 irrigation districts. And they could build bigger projects by taxing, we have eminent domain, we have the ability to bond, things like that, and we could build bigger reservoir systems. So the North Sterling Reservoir System has a reservoir of 74,590 acre feet, and we have 916.94 acres in our district. And the farmers paid for that. It was all built by private farmers' money. But we were able to do that because the state has the irrigation district law in 1905, which allowed us to do things on a bigger scale. And then came trans-basin projects. On the Poudre, you have some that come over from the North Platte Basin, and then you have big ones coming from the Colorado Basin. The Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District has the Big Thompson project. Denver has the Gross Reservoir and the Moffett Tunnel that bring it over. Aurora brings water over from the Arkansas Basin and from through the Home State Project from the Colorado River Basin. So you have all these other things that started bringing water into the South Platte Basin as well. And that was in the 1930s to 1950s time frame. And that was mainly, a lot of it, the Big Thompson project was mainly for agriculture, a supplemental supply for agriculture. Now it's almost all municipal use. And then we had well development. People saw, hey, there's water under the ground. I think I'll just drill a well and start pumping it. Colorado was one of the first ones to recognize the connectivity between the well, the groundwater, and the surface water. And so we're so far ahead of other states when I look around, whether it's Arizona or California or Idaho, they're drying up rivers because they're pumping so much water. Colorado said, hey, you can't do that. And so I'll get into a little bit of that. And that's through augmentation plants. So Colorado's been way ahead on that front. I just wanted to show you it's an older picture. We have a new diversion structure now that we built 3 years ago, but this is a diversion structure on the South Platte River. And it is not uncommon on the South Platte River in our area that we'll take all the water in the river, sweep the river completely, which is kind of this picture here. We're taking all the water into our ditch. So this is a North Sterling diversion structure. Almost every ditch has a diversion structure similar to this. So you dam off the river, raise the level a little bit, and then you take it off. And a lot of people say, well, our ditch is 61 miles long to get to the reservoir. I said, it looks like it's going uphill. It actually isn't going uphill. The river falls at 7 feet for every mile on average. Our ditch has a slope of about 1 foot every mile. So as you go about a mile, we have 6 feet in elevation difference. And so when you go 61 miles, you have 360 feet of elevation difference, so we're way up above the river where we have our reservoir. And so that's just how it works. And on a direct ditch, you would take this into your ditch and farmers would be irrigating off of it right away. On ours, it goes to fill the reservoir, then we release it in the summer for irrigation later. This is my little schematic about water rights. And so I can do it myself. And so, but it helps give you a perspective a little bit, I hope. So you have, these are actual ditches in our area. So Sterling number 1 has an 1873 water right. Right above it, Springdale has an 1886 water right. And then you have this ditch down there, Harmony number 1 has an 1895 water right. If Sterling number 1 doesn't have enough water, they call the river commissioner and they say, hey, we're short of water. One of the ditches that gets called out because of the priority system is Springdale ditch. So if Sterling number 1 says, hey, I'm short of water, the river commissioner calls the Springdale ditch right and says, hey, you gotta either shut off enough water so Sterling number 1 has enough water. So this is kind of in our area, the swing ditch. It's got an 1886 pretty old water right, but they may not have any water in July or August. But down here, this 1895 white, they almost always have water. And that's because they're downstream. And so a lot of people look at it, well, that's not fair. You have an 1886 water right. This is 1895, and you should give them water. Well, Sterling number 1 is drying all the water, taking all the water in the river here. The only thing that this 1895 water right gets is return flows. And so that's how the river works. It on average, I'll show you a couple things, but this is my attempt at return flows. So the little squiggly lines are where the ditch seeps. Some of it runs off from the fields and goes back to the river. It doesn't, historically it did that a lot. Now we have center pivot irrigation that we use ditch water in. So they'll put it into a pond, they'll pump out of that pond and they'll irrigate with it, which is much more efficient, but it results in less returns to the river and affects ditches downstream, which actually might affect. So if this guy's put in a center pivot sprinkler and he becomes really efficient, all of a sudden there's less return flows, which could make this ditch not have as much water, which could then curtail him from taking the water that he did before. So it's everything you do on the South Platte, it's so efficient. We use it from Denver to the state line 7 times. Use, reuse, dry the river, use it again. We're so efficient that when you start changing these things, it actually results not in any additional water in the summertime. It just kind of changes where the water is. So this is how that administration, and then here's my attempt at wells coming in and stealing our water as a surface water user. So these guys put in wells because the groundwater had built up and they said, hey, there's water right under here. It's a drought. I don't have enough water under Springdale. I'm going to put in a well. So they drilled a well and they started irrigating with it. And all of a sudden, this guy intercepted these squiggly marks or return flows. And the people downstream didn't get as much water. And this is kind of a cross section. So if this is the South Platte River, when you put water into a ditch, it's seepy. It actually fills the underground aquifer and makes a return flow or an accretion to the stream. The well is the opposite. It pumps the water out. It intercepts some of those return flows. It makes a depletion to the stream.
I was just curious about ditches, concrete ditches have seepage?
Not very much, yeah. And I do get that from a lot of municipal people. They say, if you farmers would just be more efficient, line your ditches, use trickle or, trickle irrigation or sprinkler irrigation so that you become really, really efficient, then we have enough water for everyone. But that's not true. The only water that us farmers use is called the consumptive use portion, and that's the water that the crop uses. Everything else goes back to the system and is used by someone else. Whether you're sprinkler irrigating it or you're flood irrigating it, the crop only uses the consumptive use portion of the water. If you're sprinkler irrigating, you don't get any runoff, you don't get much deep percolation, but if you're flood irrigating, you would get those things. And people downstream use that water. When I become more efficient in North Sterling, when I came there, we were about 10% sprinkler irrigated. We're now 90% sprinkler irrigated, and people downstream can see the difference. There's less water coming back to the river from our system. And so it affects not only their water right, but then any water right that's senior to us down there, they start taking water that we normally would have enjoyed. So it's just like a balloon, when you poke it over here, it pops out over here, and so it's a really tight, wet, efficient system. But in 1922, a professor at Colorado A&M, which is now Colorado State University, Ralph Parshall, who the Parshall flume is named after, that you measure water. We use a lot of them, but he did a study of return flows, and he said the return flows continue to increase over time. So this is back in 1922, and it said, and you have to imagine the river as a big drain. So when you take this water off in the ditches, it all comes back to the river eventually. And so it actually raised the groundwater in some places from these ditches and irrigation 100 feet. So it used to be, before irrigation, a lot of times the river would feed the aquifer. And now that we have all this irrigated agriculture, it's the aquifer feeding the river. So it kind of flip-flopped how that works. The return flows, like I said, they're from 2 to 8.5 cubic feet per second. So for every mile in the river, so that picture that I showed where we're drying the river, you go down 1 mile from there and you're gonna get between 2 and 8.5 cubic feet per second that has come back to the river from return flows. And that builds. In the wintertime, Jackson Reservoir, which is upstream of North Sterling and senior to North Sterling, they take all the water in the river in the wintertime a lot to fill up their reservoir for the next season. We're about 60 miles downstream. Between Jackson drying the river and our head gate, we'll see 350 cubic feet per second in the river. That then we take all the water in the river into our reservoir. Downstream, Julesburg, which is senior to us, could call us out, but there's 250 CFS at Julesburg, all from return flows. And so, we're using this water that was created from the irrigated agriculture to fill our reservoirs a lot of the time. And then he was just talking about the diversions from the river after spring floods have subsided are practically all from this seepage return flow water, which is true down in our area. So we're highly dependent on return flows in our area. So this is a letter to the governor from Del Carpenter, who he negotiated the South Platte Compact along with the Colorado River Compact. But this is where I was talking about the flow in May and June is excessive and then disappeared entirely in the summer. And that was prior to surface irrigation. And then after, we have a constant supply. And he said it will be enough for Nebraska and Colorado for their full demand, which Nebraska will argue that point now. But back when he was looking at it, he said it would, so it would be a constant flow. But Nebraska's flows are much better in the summertime than they used to be because of irrigated agriculture in our area. So, but this, I always found this interesting because Ralph Parshall, after doing that study, came to a Rotary Club meeting in Fort Collins in 1956, and he was kind of doom and gloom. He said, we can't continue to, because there was so many pumps that went in during the drought of the 50s. He said, the seepage return was nothing. And that's because the pumps had intercepted all this. And he said, they pumped 4,000 wells in 1956, pumped enough water to fill Horsetooth Reservoir 4 times. So yeah, that's a lot of water. And so you can imagine, as a reservoir operator or a ditch system down there, you're saying, hey, these guys drilled wells in 1950. I have an 1886 water rate and I don't have any water, and they're pumping and growing crops. And it caused a lot of tension and unrest among farmers themselves. So, and that still happens today, but Colorado, fortunately, right away in 1953, they did an Underground Water Act. But the big one was this 1969 Water Rights Determination Act, and that's where they said the wells actually have to be part of the priority system. So you have to bring your wells into the priority system, and Colorado was one of the first ones to do that. And then there were all these decrees that started to help offset the well pumping. And so now we put water into recharge basins when there is water available, and we let it soak into the underground to recharge the aquifer, and we offset our well pumping that way. And it's all an engineering accounting, depending on how far your pond is away from the river, how far your well is away from the river. There's a timing back to the river when you have accretions and when you have depletions, and you match them up, and you are able to operate your well. And that's how an augmentation plan works in an agriculture setting.
Is that-
And cities have them as well.
I'm sorry, is that up and down the whole South Platte? So even west of Denver has?
Yeah, so like there's some newer housing developments and things like that that want to go west of Denver. They have to come up with their, like even in Park County, I have a sister that lives in Park County. They have to come up with an augmentation plan if they're gonna take any water up there as well from a well. So these are all the augmentation plans that developed in the early 2000s. There was a water rights case, it was called the Empire Lodge case, where it was on the Arkansas, and the squabble was between a couple of homeowners, but it had a water component in it. And out of that case, the Colorado Supreme Court said the state engineer doesn't have the authority to grant temporary substitute water supply plans, which allowed some of these wells to pump just under a temporary plan. He said, they said, you have to go to water court, get a decree, and operate an augmentation plan. And since that time, we've had a lot of augmentation plans developed in our area. All these different colors are different augmentation plans. Some of them work together to do it because they're in an area that they can, a certain region. And this just shows that in 2002, it was a really dry year. The return flows in the river were measured, and they were lower than what Ralph Marshall had found. In 2012, which is almost the exact same year, it was really dry in 2012. After all these augmentation plants started working and really developing water, it came right back up to what Ralph Marshall had found in 1922. So these are working. These augmentation plans do work, and they're returning the flows to the river like they had historically. And that's what we were after in Colorado anyway. But one of the things I like to show is the average annual native water to the South Platte is 1.4 million acre feet. So snowpack, rainfall average, we get 1.4 million acre feet from the South Platte Basin in Colorado. We divert 400 to 500,000 acre feet that comes over from the Colorado Basin or the Arkansas into the South Platte. We have 30,000 acre feet of non-tributary wells, which are mainly in Douglas County, kind of the Parker area, that are pumping deep aquifer wells that don't affect the river. So those are our supplies. We also let 300,000 acre feet go out to Nebraska, but so our supplies, though, is about 1.8 million acre feet. On average, we divert now 500,000 acre feet in groundwater. So we pump 500,000 acre feet according to the law through augmentation plants. We divert from the surface 4 million acre feet. And then we let 300,000. So if you add it up, it's like 4.8 million acre feet that we actually use or let go. And we only have 1.8. It just doesn't seem like it adds up. But it's because we use it and we reuse it and we reuse it and we redivert it. And so we're really, really efficient on the South Platte River. Maybe individually a farmer lets water run off his field or whatever, but somebody else downstream is waiting for the water to use it. Maybe a municipality lets a lot of water go out of their wastewater treatment plant. We enjoy it. I flushed the toilet several times already this morning to get a little more water down there. But most of the people live on the east slope. Most of our water is on the west slope. And so, we divert this water over here, and that's the dilemma in Colorado. Yeah, all the people want to live they do live on the east side of the mountains, and we just don't have the water like they do on the west slope. But the other thing that's interesting about, especially the South Platte Basin, is we're the most productive agriculture area in Colorado. So you have the biggest population, 70% of Colorado's population is in the South Platte. You have 9 of the top 10 ag producing counties in Colorado, right in the South Platte Basin in northeast Colorado. And so, you know, we're bumping up against each other. You have this productive agriculture, you have these cities that are growing out over agriculture and taking the water out of agriculture, going out to our area. Aurora just went down by Marino a couple of years ago and bought the Tetzel ditch. So you have these people coming way down Parker Water and Sanitation District. I had a guy come into my office in the early 2000s and said, I have some investors and I'd like to, we're looking for some water in a small ditch and some reservoir water to back it up. And I started talking to him and they ended up buying 2,500 acres in my hometown of Isla, Colorado. And then they announced at Ramada Inn one day with a paper around that, hey, we're Parker Water and Sanitation District. And it was for the endangered species in Nebraska so they could build River Hess Reservoir, but it's just the pressures that we feel with the agriculture. And so, you know, and we're highly productive. You look at agriculture on the west, we're all connected, Western Slope, but in the South Platte Basin, you know, we have cattle, we have corn, we have sugar beets, we have alfalfa, we have dairies, we have all these things going on, and the West Slope brings a lot of their cattle and other things over to the East Slope to finish it and offer it to people for food. So we have lots of benefits for agriculture. It's those return flows, those wetlands, that recreation from our reservoir. We have people out there. It's a state park. It's 3,000 acres of surface. And I had the head of Aurora Water out there, and he's like, are people allowed to boat out here? And I said, yeah, but it was like a Tuesday, and of course there's nobody out there. And then he's used to Chatfield or Cherry Creek, and where they have to actually boat in one direction. And when you get off, you let somebody else on. He was out here the next week. And so he brought his boat out, and he was out boating out on North Sterling Reservoir. So, but one of the other, so this is where I live. The south, or the North Sterling ditch goes right through our property, and this is a really dry year. But you can see the difference that the seepage from irrigated agriculture creates all these wetlands and return flows that go back to the river, but it just changes the whole landscape. So you go from, our ditch system is at the northern edge of productive agriculture. The rest is pasture where cattle graze. In the summertime, you know, cattle are raised on dry pasture. They're rarely raised on irrigated stuff in our area. So we just grow hay for dairies and for our cattle in the wintertime. But you can I just like this picture because you can see the contrast of, you know, the difference that the irrigation makes. And this picture right up here is actually a recharge pond. So we put that water in there when there's enough water that we have a really junior water right, but we put it into there and we let it soak into the underground and it offsets the well pumping. But it also is, it's highly attractive to waterfowl. It's water that goes in there into kind of a new pond where grass has grown up into it, so ducks love it. And so we've done a lot of deal with Ducks Unlimited and other places that actually are able to have wildlife enjoy all that. So there's a lot of other benefits to irrigated agriculture other than, you know, giving us food. So, but I think I better stop there. I think that my time's about up, but I did have a few slides on the Perkins County Canal, but and I won't get into that. We can talk about Nebraska later.
Great.
You just help me visualize how that return flow gets back to the river, like you flood irrigate alfalfa, flood away, you know, picture 1 molecule of water. Going back in. How is that actually getting into the river, the geology of it?
So, like in most of our, even in our water court change cases where we might change an agricultural water right, you have to look at those historic return flows. And normally, like on a flood irrigated system, 50%, 50 to 60% would actually be used by the crop. And then the other would be split. You'd have about the other, well, 40%. So 20% would go into the underground that wasn't reached by the crop's roots.
Sure.
And it would go into the underground groundwater and actually just make its way. So it just travels real slowly through the
And then just percolate back in under the riverbed?
Yeah, it's almost like, well, we're all up here on the sides, the river's down here, so it's actually flowing downhill. And then it pops out right at the river's edge.
Or downstream.
Yeah, or it might, or it might percolate over to a small drainage or something like that and then flow. You might have several.
That makes sense too.
And then the rest is overland loss. If you're flood irrigating, it would run off.
And then just to piggyback, and you were talking like change case, you use 60%. Do they say, oh, it's corn, it's gonna use approximately X%, alfalfa this, winter wheat, does each crop have a different?
The
percentage
irrigation
or-
efficiency is the same usually, but the crop uses, the amount of water that you would apply to grow that crop is different. So the consumptive use for alfalfa is a little bit, well, that's actually really pretty similar to corn, but if you're growing wheat or something like that that uses a lot less water, then that's what you would use. You look at the historic practice of the irrigation, what kind of crops they're growing, and then that's how you make the determination of what the consumptive use portion is that you could sell or change.
In the courts, we use a study done by water engineers based on that stuff.
Right.
Thank you.
Jason? Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Well, I just had a quick question. So I'm a North Dakota farm kid. That's how I grew up. And North Dakota is somewhat similarly divided. The east side is really rich in, kind of high water yielding crops, that sort of thing. The western is very arid and dry. And that's how North Dakota also farms and works in a lot of its ways. So seeing all of this, seeing how much water is used on the east side, it feels very, I guess, unnatural or artificial. In using that high water yield crops, the alfalfa, the corn, things like that. Why haven't farmers or why hasn't industry adapted on other ways to make better use of that land that doesn't cost such a high water factor to it, but still could be a high, economic benefit that all the land.
Yeah, the economics of a dryland crop are so much
Sure,
less.
but I mean, even just some entirely different industries.
Can I understand?
Joel's gonna talk about that.
Answer that. It's markets, okay? We have a developed market, corn, alfalfa, and all that. Okay, these low water use crops, generally, we don't have as big of a market for those, or you have to develop a market for them. So it's a horse, chicken and egg scenario on these things. We have crops we can grow under irrigation that use less water, but we have nowhere to sell. Or like one guy in that comment said, we can grow a pickup load, have an absolute great market for it. You grow a pickup load in a 5-gallon bucket and you crash the market. So that's the reason.
Well, and the other thing is, our area is one of the best alfalfa producing areas in the United States because we are an arid climate. And alfalfa is one of those crops, people have been beaten on it, like, what's this alfalfa? It doesn't beat anybody. I mean, for dairy production and for cattle, alfalfa is like this, it's this perfect.
It's high water.
Yeah, I mean, so when you can deliver it to, and these dairies have developed in this area, just like Jill said, there is a big market, and our alfalfa goes even back east because dairies back there can't grow that really good alfalfa because the climate is wet, so it's hard to put up a good crop of alfalfa. So it's just that in our area, this developed as, sugar beets. Our climate is really good for these kind of things. Corn, on the other hand, you have better corn areas.
Artificial, but
Yeah, I think you grew up in better corn areas.
But that goes back to our whole food system, and really what the farmers here are supporting are livestock, correct?
Yeah, and it's a high source of protein that develops it. And like, for instance, I raise cattle. I grew up on a cattle ranch. So we raise cattle on dry pasture. We have in our area, dry pasture grown cattle they do really well here just because of the climate. And so we can raise cattle up to 1,000 pounds just on the pasture. We can go even further, but efficiently we raise them to 1,000 pounds just grazing out on the pasture. And then we finish them in the last, 90 days with corn fed. Some people like grass fed, whatever it may be, but it's just a really good climate for cattle too.
Animals, yeah.
Well, Jim, you grew up here. I grew up east of here about 600, well, from where I'm at, it's 500-600 miles.
Yeah.
Like the climate differences between here and there are dramatic as well. Although last year, I mean, here when you have irrigation systems or sprinkler systems in feedlots, what's it for? That's for sure. Back in our area, it's for humidity and keeping the cattle cool because of the humidity levels. We reach heat indexes typically a couple times a year, 120. Last year, one producer, big producer, his water system went down and they hit 124-degree heat index. And they were trying to move cattle, they were dropping, dead where they stood. So that's an economic incentive to bring them out here.
Yeah.
Is those things. Also, growing up, before we got concrete and you get 20 inches of rain in a month, what's that bring out feedlot? You're knee deep in mud and cattle don't like it.
Yeah, we just don't have that out here. So
Or
it's just-
rare, extremely rare.
I'll save my question till after Joel.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
So, well, I don't know why I had talked and Jim Cook covered quite a bit. But we'll get back,
Let
we'll
me,
get into.
let me introduce you, Joel. So, very happy, again, someone coming from a little ways away from Akron. He actually works for the Colorado Water Center, and I didn't realize, but actually, we have 3 speakers on our agenda today from the Water Center, including me, which, whoops, but, so Joel is a regional water resource specialist for the Colorado Water Center and Colorado State University Extension. He grew up in Northeast Nebraska on an irrigated dairy farm and has BS and MS in mechanized agriculture with an emphasis on irrigation and water management. He's been with CSU since 2000. Prior to that, he held a water resource extension educator and research coordinator position with University of Nebraska. He does a lot of education and research related to irrigation and crop production with an emphasis on limited water supply. He has a lot of on-farm demonstration projects and has done research and education programs on drought-tolerant corn, alternative irrigated crops, nitrogen management, tillage and residue management, irrigation timing impacts on crop production.
You
So-
expanded what I sent you on quite a bit.
So let's hear it for Joel, and he's gonna talk more about some of the challenges of efficiency in agriculture, which we heard a little teaser of with Jim's talk.
So, I mean, over the last 23, almost 24 years in Colorado, everybody talks, well, efficiency will save us. If agriculture uses what, right now it's what, 85%, 84%, somewhere in that.
Numbers all over.
Yeah, I mean, the number changes year to year. Well, agriculture uses mid-80% water. If they can conserve 10%, look at all the water we have. And I'm going like, no, I mean, in a basin. Now, if you had water not moving through the basin, that could possibly be an aspect. That's why efficiency in regions such as the Republican, because all the time he claims the Republicans want to start talking economics. But they are parts of the South Platte, both of them in the South Platte Basin, because they both meet up in Missouri, in that area. So efficiency, I mean, we've heard it time and time again. And the way water was developed was not based on efficiency, it was based on waste. As we developed the rate irrigation system, up and down the South Platte Basin. You know, agriculture in the South Platte, and we've already got some of the numbers. 5 of the top 10 counties in the South Platte Basin are in the South Platte, $3.5 billion a year livestock and crop production system, 854,000. 80% of Colorado's population is in the South Platte Basin.
I heard that somewhere.
Yeah, no, that's why I said that. Gonna grow. Like I said, 80% of the water's on the west slope. So we have a lot of water. Population growth isn't going where the water's at. It should be going, you know, we're gonna do this, let's put it over on the west slope. Yeah, move the people over there. Yeah, net water short, it's always water short. Nobody ever has all the water they want, even in the Republican days. You know, can increasing efficiency solve the problem? And one thing we talked about what was being grown here. You know, well, agriculture consumes this amount of water. No, it's not, agriculture doesn't consume it. Everybody in this room consumes 100% of the water in the basin. Because we eat the products that are grown by the basin. So it's the public consumes 100% of the water, not agriculture, because we're growing to fit the market's niches that we have. People, the livestock industry gets a black eye, but people want meat. If the meat industry went away, nobody wanted meat, what would the farmers do in the Southwest? They figure out a way to meet that niche.
Those are beans.
More beans, yeah. Then we have methane problems.
Not from cattle.
Yeah, from humans. So, I mean, that's the issues. Again, another map, you see this again earlier. We'll just slap by it. You know, the prior development, and this is even goes back into Nebraska and South Platte, or the Platte River system. Reading the records and the diaries of the first people moving here along the Oregon Trail is interesting. They say, you know, springtime, the Platte River is a raging river, mile wide, you know, just cleaning everything out. But you get to the summer, you can walk across the river and not get your feet wet in areas. So that's how the river system was developed. Today, if you brought back those settlers today and threw them in the river, they'd be going like a mile on Mars. There was no trees. Why? Well, one is the floods scoured them out. Number two is we have wildfires probably every 1 to 3 years. Through the high plains, you have bison come along, devouring up them and churning up the banks as well. There was no trees. The pocket isolated. You read the diaries. We reached X next spot because we saw this big grove of trees off the river system. The fires, they didn't burn wood on their fires. What did they burn? To make their campfires.
Down.
Buffalo chips. So, yeah, development started with the irrigation, you know, like Jim said, the miners started, the farmers came to feed the miners, and so on and so forth. And as the river became more consistent flowing, that led to more development. It led to storage. Storage led to better flowing rivers over time. So increased storage, like I said, increased areas 100 feet in areas with irrigation. Here's a simplistic thing on it. You know, water, here's our river system. We meter our water out. We irrigate our crops. Excess irrigation, inefficient irrigation goes down into the aquifer. Some of it will go back over this way. Some of it goes back over towards the river and feeds the river. And that's return flows.
That's a better picture than mine.
Look where I found it. You got a better picture though. Just wait to my real artistic skills here as we get there. 2 primary irrigation systems in Colorado and in virtually everywhere in the United States. Surface irrigation, furrow irrigation, you can have flood, wild basin flood irrigation. This is the low efficiency systems on farm. We have high efficiency, which is center pivots. Now by Colorado law, when you do exchange rates, they say this is 50% efficient. I'll disagree with that. When Colorado says we do this, they say 75% efficient. I'll disagree with that as well. By management, one is typical furrow irrigation, I will say on average is about 40% efficient. Center pivot, if I manage the system well, I'm in the low 90s. If I'm running 75% efficient, I'm a piss poor manager. Or I got problems with my irrigation system. I mean, you drive along the interstate and you see water squirting up in the air, you know, that's those things that happen. That's the management, that's inefficiencies. Water conservation, irrigation efficiency is a big thing. And in actual water efficiency in agriculture is cost savings. One of them is. The other one is, as people have moved away from agriculture, labor. Nebraska did a study years ago saying, how many acres could one person manage for irrigation wise versus center pivot? This was back in the 80s. How many acres can one person manage for irrigation?
320.
They said 800.
800?
Up to 800 acres. Well, they got bigger fields.
Yeah.
They got quarter section
They didn't have
fields.
North Dakota.
Yeah, they don't have this little 35 acre patch up there. But you're always going around making set changes at least twice, hopefully twice a day. You know, to be efficient. You have problems pushing that water through the field. When you have the center pivot, now they talk about 1,500, 2,000 acres that a person can manage. Until you start blowing gearboxes, tires, and everything else out in the middle of the field. You've never done that, have you? Yeah. 95-degree day carrying an 80-pound gearbox through the field. So those are issues there. And then actual consumption of water. The plants will consume water. And then only so much water, and that's driven by atmospheric demands. You know, the atmosphere says it, the plant will meet that as a transpiration and cooling effect, with water saved with water. So how does it impact streams? And this is where I will get into I'm not a graphic designer. I couldn't find good graphics on this, so I'm a stick person. If you want to see my stick man drawings, I can show you those, pull those up, you're quite proud of them. But the way the system works, I mean, this is going to be very simplistic. Point A, we have 20 CFS of water running. Diverter A, I take 5 CFS. Doesn't matter. It's all relative. Divert 5 CFS off. Oh yeah, I've got 15 CFS left. 5 CFS goes off. I have 10. Divert 5 off. I still have 5. Everybody's happy. Like Jim said, nobody's calling. If everybody has the same diversion rights. And say this is the state line. Nebraska's not even calling out the river. They can't because they get the right. They have the rights. This is one of the river's excessive flow. We're not even counting in return flows in here. When we get to low water, half river flow, we got 10 CFS here, we divert 5, we got 5 CFS, we got down to 5, he diverts 5 off, oops, we're down to 0. And this guy still has 0. Who's happy? Who's gonna be calling out the river? These guys, you know, if these guys have senior rights, they're gonna be shutting these 2 guys out. Over the system. So how do return flows work and keep the system rolling? Yeah, okay, got 10 CFS, he diverts 5. Well, since we're talking efficiency, and we're being really easy here, say it's 40% efficiency, out of that 5, he uses 2. 3 goes back to the river. So now we have 8, divert 5, you know, we're down to 3 come back, we're up to 6, divert 5, 3 come back, we're at 4. Everybody's close to being happy, unless this guy down here has, at the very end, still has a 5 CFS water right, but we're close. Even on those kind of systems. Now, the augmentation return flows, the state manages it. It's 100 years, isn't it? Right? Impact of the stream.
Oh, well, yeah, if you want to
If
go
you're
a non-tributary well, you're not sure that you're not gonna.
Up to 100 years. So, I mean, even that, we're talking with this, with irrigation off it, and that shut a lot of wells off over the years. After 2002. So if we go back in here and we say, I go to high efficiency, I've now depleted my return flows, take care of my return flows. So but I'm diverting only 3 CFS. I'm being more efficient. Now I'm up to 60% efficiency, or 100% efficiency here. So 10 CFS, I divert 3, I'm down to 7. Divert 3, I'm to 4. Divert 3, I'm down to 1. On that system. If we do this long enough over time, that's the value of return flows in the system. So these irrigators here, if they go high efficiency, they need to come up with a way of keeping return flows going, whether it's an augmentation pond. So they're diverting 5, I put 5 into, put 2 into the augmentation system, so I keep that system rolling to some extent. And so it's a different plan on those systems.
But in Colorado, you're not required to make up for, if you become more efficient, you're not required to make up downstream for those efficiencies, unless you're on the Arkansas River, who got sued, Colorado got sued by Kansas on the Arkansas. And as part of that lawsuit, if you put in a higher efficiency system, you have to augment for that, because Kansas is saying, hey, you're taking some. So no other basin in Colorado.
Yeah, it may happen eventually too. You know, I mean, you never know. You can never say never.
No.
I mean, one good joke is, remember 2002, you know? What was the headwaters of the South Platte River? Where was that at? It wasn't up in the mountains. Denver wastewater treatment facility.
Yeah.
I remember the picture, Hal Simpson standing there, nothing above, water coming in, and it was going flowing in and flowing there. And that was the joke too, is where Jim come along and goes, yeah, I flushed several times here. I was at a meeting in Denver, and how many of you remember the motto? If it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down. I was at a meeting, and I know producers that live off of municipal wastewater supplies just downstream. I said, that's kind of really not the motto to have. Said, my motto is flush 3 times, make a farmer happy. And we had that discussion. Why is that? Because I said, you're impacting their livelihood. Yeah, you're conserving water. You're still letting these people irrigate their lawns. Can you chew your lawn? Can you eat your lawn? Because with enough salad dressing, you probably could. But the producers downstream were shutting off because they didn't have water. But low efficiency, high 20% and even a 20, everybody's still happy, but we still have less water going through that system. Now, if you multiply this as a small section, now you can multiply it throughout the whole basin. How does that impact you over time? You're gonna have to have more storage to meet the water needs over the year. And how easy is it to get water storage here? NISP. I can see his face, can't remember. I'm not drawing.
Carl Brower?
No, with Northern.
Yeah,
That's Northern.
Oh, Brad Wynn?
Before Brad.
Oh, Eric Wilkinson.
Eric Wilkinson. Thomas, he goes, yeah, when you're doing development, you have to put it in blocks, you're current blocks of 20 on developing water storage. Remember this comment? He goes, you got your first year trying to get everything through, developed and get it through courts, and the next 20 years of building and fighting everybody to get it going. And he goes, so I've had 2 careers, two sections of my career. So each took 20 years, so he spent a 40-year career on this. And you try to do that on other ones. It's a struggle with development. We're living off our forefathers' foresight of developing a system. Now we have fights over making it and developing it in the right areas. So the return flows, a lot of times, build irrigation within the basin. Jim showed that. Jim's his family's living history of what built that over generations. Retiming of the water to low time flows. So if we take that water out with efficiencies, now we have problems. And stabilize it. Now, like I said, efficiency is a great thing. When we're talking about salinity issues, other issues, nitrates, high efficiency is a great thing. Long term, but you still have to maintain flows for water consumption downstream and the senior rights. With high efficiency, you generally have lower nitrate issues in the groundwater. You'll have the salinity aspect is generally less long term, not always, but long term. The water supply, we already saw this. The 4 million acre feet of divergence. And we talk about the trans basin divergence, 400,000 acre feet. One thing with law is what happens with those? The owners of those water rights can keep track of those to extinction over time. And they're starting to do that. So in reality, take that 0.4 out of the 1.8 equation down the road. So we're living with 1.4 million acre feet of native diversion, native stream flows. Efficiency, in my point, basin-wide. Now, again, on-farm, basin, those are 2 different topics to look at. On-farm efficiency, greater yields. Is that, for irrigation of those, maybe you're getting every 7 to 10 days, a lot of water at once, then dry period. A lot of water, dry period. Well, early season, that's a lot of water, and it's too much water, so the plants are stressed the other way. They're kind of waterlogged instead of having, and you get to the later season, you don't have enough time to get back fast enough to irrigate them, so they're under water stress, drought stress at times. May not be able to see it, but there's small levels. And small levels. Reduced leaching of nutrients. I apply a pound of nitrogen, I can probably use my 99% of that if I'm a very good efficient irrigator. On our stuff, I shoot for what's the typical nitrogen management old time, 1.1 pounds of nitrogen per bushel. That was growing back up in the 70s and 80s. I strive to achieve 0.6 to 0.7 pounds of applied in per pound per bushel of corn because of efficiencies. Labor savings, like I talked about. How many acres can you farm by yourself for over a pivot? And labor's driving a lot of this. It may not make complete economic sense. I've seen pivots that are 40 acre pivots. If you really look at it, it's hard to justify it economically for 40 acres, but it's a labor. Downfalls of that, reduced return flows, need for greater storage, which is expensive and difficult over time. And that's one of the things we need to look at. And from a basin-wide, We wanna keep the system working. It's gonna be a give and take. As changes occur to greater efficiency happen, changes in the system will need to be initiated and made to, and that's the storage aspect. The senior water rights will drive the system over time and still drive it. And of course, you got compact compliance and everything else now. That's a simple thing on efficiency. It's not an easy answer.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts of being representatives from the Eastern Plains, far Eastern Plains. The most recent water plan brought forest management into the equation in terms of source water protection. I didn't hear either of you mention that, and what's the investment in source water protection? So I think, our source water comes from forests, the mountains, and the western slope, some aquifers, but at what level, or is there any level of investment in that source water protection? I'm hearing
Yeah.
efficiencies, or increased efficiencies may be part of the answer, and storage is part of the answer, but.
Well, our forests and our mountains are part of our storage.
Yes.
So if you don't have a healthy forest area up there, you get more sublimation, where the snow goes directly into and you get higher amounts of runoff at certain times where it'd be better to come out at a slower pace because maybe you get more dust on the snow or whatever, it creates more evaporation. So all of those things play into it, and it's always important to look at the forest health, because that's our source water, and really it doesn't, as far as the quality and stuff, it doesn't matter as much for agriculture, but for municipalities and stuff, that part, the water quality part, is really important, that you get good quality water down in here.
I'm just interested in the investment piece of that. I know the water plan, I think.
Yeah, it does have a big portion.
There's funding available for forest health treatments to help prevent these catastrophic large size wildfires. But in terms of water users and water rights owners and an investment from that perspective, is that a direction that you think will ever?
No, I think Colorado's gonna be always looking at that kind of thing as Colorado. Me as an ag producer down there, I don't necessarily, I see the importance, and I wouldn't oppose Colorado doing things like that, as far as using some of the money that, whether it's Colorado Water Conservation Board grants or whatever it may be, to use for that purpose, or even the legislature setting aside some of that money. But it doesn't, it's hard to bring that back to an ag producer down there and say, we need this, this healthy forest up here, even though we actually do need it, but we don't think about that a lot of times. It's no different than a municipal person going to the grocery store and doesn't know where their food, they really do need the ag, and they can't buy it all up and take all the water off, because that's really gonna, drive what you see here and what you enjoy with open spaces and all this kind of stuff. It makes a difference. So we both have to kind of understand the importance of all these kind of things when it comes to the water, the bigger water picture.
Yeah, and as far as, the health, not in the Colorado native, I kind of what history is and all of other aspects. And when first people came across, and this is also with the high plains, they came along and said, fire's bad. We don't want fire. Depends on where you're at. Fire can be good, fire can be bad. Fire kept the trees out of the high plains. Now you drive back in areas I used to drive around it a lot in, cedar infestations around the Broken Bow area. It was beautiful sandhills country. Now it's becoming a forest. But they're getting back into where they're doing tree management and fires. Mountains. How often were fires historically occur? And they kept the forestry thinned down. I found that a couple studies from California, I was looking at some stuff on that, and they said, depending on the type of forest you get, it was anywhere from 3 to 5 years on a lot of their forests to 20 years. Anytime in there, you have fire on the frequency. When's the last time some of these acres had a fire? 80 years? That's why, one of the aspects they think, and climate change is driving a lot of these big fires. I think it's our previous management is doing a lot of this too. When you look at pictures, we were at one place up in the mountains, and they had some historical pictures, they were looking at this one, saying, look at this rock formation. I sat there looking at the little picture, well, that's neat. I can't see through the forest. I can't see it, because it was all trees, and a dense tree man. And you look at what it was back in the early 1900s, like a 1910 picture. There was probably 5 to 10% of the trees there. And that's historical, what our historical forests look like. Not like they are today.
We got a lot of questions. And even more opinions.
Do I sit down?
No, I won't ask. Allow me a brief lead in. Number one, thank you guys. I mean, your backgrounds are awesome. I love hearing it. I'm glad we're having an ag day. I'm from a dairy farm background as well. And to hear, the kind of consumptive use for crops, but also the animal component is awesome. Will County resident, Will County's #1 in the state. We consistently rank in the top 10 for ag production. People need to remember where their food comes from. If it's a choice between watering my lawn or diverting that water to ag, all day, every day, I would say divert to ag, and not have my lawn, my wife, San Luis Valley native, potatoes, alfalfa. I spent multiple summers working on my father-in-law's properties, 20 pivots. I can manage 20 pivots. I couldn't manage that acreage if it was flooded irrigated. So I say that to say, when we're talking ag and efficiencies, I want to bring it back to that for just a minute, because it's all well and good to say line ditches. Like you said, it's all well and good to say put in center pivots. Until we hear what you guys are saying, which is the return flow aspect is something that people don't think about and that is critically important to the health of the system. So where do you guys see future ag efficiencies? That's my overall question. Pivots are easy, but what's kind of the next step in your guys' mind? What's the next step in animal production? I mean, the lactating dairy cow is what, 30 to 50 gallons of water a day?
You're not gonna change that.
You're not gonna change that, right? So where are the efficiencies maybe in ag that you guys see coming down the road?
So I just know I'm North Sterling when I grew up. So my grandpa's uncle is the one that started the ranch. So I'm 4th generation, my son will be 5th generation in Colorado, and it's so much different than it was. So even when I was in college, I went back one summer and I rented a farm to make some money for it. And I grew 120 bushel corn on North Sterling ground. It's not uncommon now to grow 250 bushel corn on North Sterling ground. North Sterling ground is a hilly, it's different. We're kind of up on the side of the hill, and so it's not this river bottom land that's as highly productive, but I see the major increase in efficiency is just higher yields with less water. They're making strains of corn and different things like that that lower use water or higher yielding for the same amount of water. And so
the corn plant will use the same amount of water. We work with these drought genetics. It doesn't matter. The repeat water use is the same as the old genetics.
But they can raise the yield for that seed.
Those are GMO seeds? You're talking about the seeds?
Yeah,
And see,
yeah, it's just hybrid seeds is what we.
and and here's one thing, and I've gone through this over the decades when GMOs came out. Everybody goes, "Oh, this is bad wheat frankenfood." I go, "Do you realize how much less we use for insecticides over the years?"
Mm-hmm.
I haven't applied an insecticide for rootworm, corn beetles, all those things in several decades. Whereas I would have to do that every year. And when you apply some of those insecticides, it takes out everything.
Yeah.
Beneficials and everything.
Yeah, the same thing is for the cattle production. You know, our cattle that we grew then are completely different than the cattle that we grew now. And that's through different breeding programs, and you're smarter about your genetics and things like that when you're crossbreeding your cattle. And so milk production is so much higher. The cow drinks 30 or 40, but she produces a lot more milk than she did 20 years ago.
Yeah, she drinks more water today. Because milk out means more water in.
But, you know, and the other thing is just the technology is growing just leaps and bounds. And so we put in all automated head gates on the North Sterling system. So I know exactly when farmers are taking water and if anybody's taking too much water. And it also maintains the correct level that the farmer needs before, for instance, I would turn water out of the reservoir and maybe some farmers would order some more for the next day and I'd push some more water out. And when I push more water out, the head in the ditch is a little higher and you get a little more water out of every head gate. Well, the farmer in a center pivot system can only use so much, so that's going out and we're not as efficient with, so that's improving our efficiency. So there's a lot of, and then I was sitting in the South Platte Forum and they were talking about artificial intelligence. And, you know, that in England, they did a whole field without anybody touching it. He said it was the most expensive wheat crop they've ever produced, but they did it.
Yeah.
They did it. It was a tiny field. And so it's just interesting, you know, I think ag is growing in this technology a lot more than people think. We have GPS on our tractors. We strip till instead of tilling all the ground, we leave all this organic matter on the field. I mean, we're doing so much more than we ever did and with less people. And so that's the efficiency. We're really producing a lot with a lot fewer people and a lot fewer inputs. And I think water.
Yeah, you got that with the water. I mean, we know how to predict the water use of plants, when the timing is gonna be, and predict that. And the farmers have that ability to look up, okay, my crop used this much water last week, here's the weather forecast, here's kind of where we should be at, instead of kind of going, cool. But yeah, better safe than sorry, I guess, right? That used to be a motto, you know, growing up. Now, well, it looks like it's gonna be dry, so I better put a lot of water on the well, you know, forecasting precipitation, those temperatures, and that, so we're becoming more efficient. I mean, growing up, you know, even with the sprinkler system we had, you know, we were talking 20-25 inches of water. We thought we were doing a good job. Now we're down to 12, 13. And we're not leaching water. We're being more efficient with it because we know how to better manage that water. We're getting better systems out there.
Can I ask a follow-up question of, let's say, you know, the ditch system that you manage, they're 90% sprinkler irrigation, and they're essentially diverting less water, right? They're not diverting.
So it depends on whether you're a water short system. So the example I gave you, if you're the Sterling #1 ditch, it's 1873, it calls out water rights clear up, they're diverting less water. So a ditch system that has a senior right that always has their water right satisfied, and they put in center pivot, they actually are diverting less water. But that means Springdale ditch is in priority now, and they're diverting that water because they have an 1886 water right. And we're a water short system as North Sterling, so we farm maybe 90% of our acres. We have the potential to do a little bit more. We're not gonna divert any less water.
So this is the point I wanna make, is like, you put in more efficient systems, but because the river is allocated as it is with all these junior water rights stacked up on top of one another, you're just gonna be producing more.
Right.
Consuming more.
But you're gonna get into it this afternoon, and North Sterling has done 2 alternative transfer methods, or they call them water sharing agreements now. So we have with Xcel Energy and Brush for the Pawnee Power Plant, and we have one with Tallgrass Energy, that we actually supply them some water. We've gone through the change case, and we've done all this, and we supply them some water, so our farmers have the ability either to let their alfalfa sit without a third irrigation or different things like that, or use, because we're more efficient, use a little bit less water, and we have the ability to lease some of that water. And that can be done with the municipality, it can be done with the industry, and these kind of ideas are coming around in the Colorado water system.
But does that depend on the weather and the year? I mean, municipalities need a consistent.
Right.
100%.
And
So-
Brett Bovee from Water Research, is that right? Yeah, Water Research, he's gonna talk about that after our break
Right.
and get into some of those issues.
But it does, I mean, you're right.
Yeah,
Farmers don't match,
right.
but municipalities have usually more storage that they can weather a year. And they can give us some notice, like, hey, we need water next year, and farmers can then plan and plant accordingly.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. One more question, then I wanna make sure we got break time too. Yeah.
Okay. this isn't a quick question, and this is controversial, and, but the very first class, Dr. Tracy asked us about our food system. And should we have such an ag presence in Colorado, because we don't have the water? And we now have these food systems where we can ship our food through Iowa and Illinois, et cetera. Just wondering
Yeah,
what
and I
you
think
guys
there's,
think of that.
it's kind of like I mentioned earlier, there's some things we can do better than corn. We can't, I mean, they grow, with no irrigation there, they grow more. But then you don't have the shipping costs and you have a market here and things like that. So there are things that we can do. Alfalfa, we take alfalfa back east, so because we grow higher quality alfalfa. So there's things that we can do out here that is better. And then, we also have dry crops, but they just don't bring in the water. And eventually, as the population grows, in my lifetime, there's already been municipalities out there and they will buy it up. And they might, and they, Parker's planning a pipeline right now. From right around Pruitt Reservoir back to Parker, 140 miles. And that's not gonna be uncommon, and that will eventually dry up our area. It will happen. I mean, we might as well use it when we can, I guess, and do the best that we can with
Things
it.
will change. I mean, the other thing too, with local water supplies and local food production. I'm gonna go, the local to the United States. It's a security situation.
Yeah.
I mean, remember the '70s when Middle East said, well, we're gonna shut the oil off. That aspect and those threats. And people don't realize how much food is being brought into the United States. I mean, we're a big exporter of food. I mean, if things change, we can swap from corn because we're a big exporter of corn. We can grow other crops eventually, figure it out. And that's in these water short areas like we're at in eastern Colorado. Some of the things we're working with is not only do I do a little, most of my work is in the Republican basin, which is a completely different beast than the South Platte. Because it's all groundwater. There is no mountains to save us or snowpack to save us. It's all precipitation and how much we're using. We're looking at alternative crops, high value, potentially higher value later down the road. South Platte, you go down Ovid area, you don't see dry beans anymore. And that used to be a big production, but they have water quality issues now. And one of the crops we're looking at, we're gonna try to do some work and bring it in because it has better salinity tolerance than traditional dry beans. And actually better than corn on the numbers. And there's a couple other crops we'd like to look at down the road.
Which is cowpeas?
Black eyed peas is one, soybeans are another, but soybeans,
Soybeans didn't improve very good.
well, it's the pH, issue, not the salinity. But the black eyed peas, they do very well on high pH. And the salinity aspect, by the numbers I can see, and we're gonna do some work on, beans, decisiemens are the measurement of salinity. 1 decisiemens above, you're starting to kill cow, or dry beans, typical dry beans, pintos and all those. Corn, 1.7 decisiemens, you start seeing yield reductions. Alfalfa, I can't remember what alfalfa is, but it's a little more tolerant. The black eyed peas and cow peas, we're gonna do some more work on, but the number says 5.0 decisiemens and above. So there's an alternative crop, if we start getting into these water short time periods again, or higher value.
Some of our guys tried like hemp, it's a big deal. Let's go and do some CBDs and different, things like that. And they crazy because the market, it seems like a good idea. And I've had even a lady from Aurora Water said, you guys just need to grow these higher value crops. And I said, well, it's a market driven thing. We can't all change. And plus you have equipment for corn, you have equipment for hay, it's different than what you would have for hemp. And then the other thing is, just I want to make a comment about the cattle. The other thing that they do, like on corn stalks, we graze corn stalks all winter long. And no other animal can process, the cow has 4 stomachs, so they can't process that no other animal can except a cow, and they grow on it and they thrive on it. And so the cow really fits in an irrigated agricultural area. And so, you know, both the dairy cow and the beef cow.
Yeah, it does, and but on the aspect of,
I'm gonna
but
have
You have
to,
to cut.
yeah,
one
all right,
quick
give me a
question.
break.
on the aspect of these alternative crops and low water use. When you start looking at this and the economics of it, corn, like I said, 13, 14 inches of irrigation when you're efficient. I can grow a crop of cowpeas, which right now are running economically neck and neck with corn on a fully irrigated bed with 8 inches. Because ET of corn is 24 to 25 inches. That's the consumptive use of corn, rainfall, irrigation, everything. In our region, the black eyed peas, the optimum is about 15 to 16. So there's about a 9 to 10 inch savings of water. And in the south, in the Republican Basin, 9 to 10 inches of water and the lifespan of that aquifer can be big. And we're working on the market. We do have a market. The United States is a net importer of black eyed peas. So if we can stop that.
Good luck.
Okay, let's come back at 11:05, and give a hand to Joel and Sarah. They're gonna stick around through lunch, so you can continue to ask some questions while you're out.
Yes.
I think, yeah.
Right now, the guys.
He's in. So he's good, yeah. He has like a board meeting. No, yeah, he's still good, he's still good.
I did.
Good, holidays? Sure. Kind of quiet, you know, that's all right. Yeah, good, busy, traveled back to Minnesota.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, that's,
I'll mark that down. So, probably eventually it works. You can get things.
Especially like.
To do Yeah, it's one of those that's paid.
I never come when I go out, just swirl around, just so. I don't really know it.
No, I had it out inside. We probably took more time than we were supposed to.
Oh, you did?
Right. Unfortunately, I don't have to do an introduction because I'm the next speaker.
Okay, round of applause for Karen.
So, I'm gonna be talking a little bit about salinity in the South Platte River Basin and a group that I'm helping to facilitate to discuss some of those issues and try and develop some research questions and hopefully in the long-term solutions for addressing salinity. So, some of the stuff that Joel and Jim talked about is in my presentation, so I'll just breeze right over that. So, thanks. Okay, so again, there's lots of irrigated ag. All the green little dots are irrigated agriculture along the South Platte River and River Basin. I've already heard this stuff. What I wanted to also point out is that we live in, again, this very populated region. So not only do you have the aspect of return flows coming off of irrigated agricultural field, but as Jim mentioned, you've got wastewater coming into our river system. So hugely densely populated region all along the Front Range here, all flowing into the South Platte River and along with irrigated agricultural return flows. So studies have been done over time to look at trends in salinity, both in groundwater and in surface water in the South Platte River Basin. This was a study done in 1987 by USGS showing kind of TDS, total dissolved solids, which is measurement, and Joel's not here right now, which is good because he gets upset about using TDS to represent salinity. But it's a representation of salinity, showing groundwater salinity in the basin, and then Northern Water has done some studies as well with groundwater and surface water salinity all along the South Platte. And you can see there's varying degrees of salinity in the groundwater, but some high areas, you know, the pink and the red are fairly high, although 1.8 to 2.5, we just heard some crops cannot be grown with those ranges. So if you're pumping water out of the aquifer in these regions and applying it to fields, you're gonna have some fairly saline water. This is a study that was done by Mirbo Hydrogeology, I think they're called. It's a consulting firm. They did this in 2020 and found, you know, increasing salinity as you go on out to the eastern plains. So fairly low here coming off of the mountains, increasing in the Denver metro area because you're getting some of the wastewater inputs, getting higher. We've got a very high little reach right here. And then again, just generally increasing as you get further downstream. This one is, I think, TDS. Yeah, this is TDS as well, which Joel has some issues with, but it's a representation of salinity. So once we get to a certain point, and as Joel was just mentioning, you know, certain crops cannot be grown for agriculture. It also becomes an issue when areas like rural water or other folks are bringing water back down from these reaches where they have high salinity, and they're piping it back down to be used for municipalities. It becomes a really expensive treatment issue. So salinity is becoming a problem. And salt is accumulating in the system essentially because we're using the water so many times. What happens is there's different inputs. So with wastewater treatment, there can be some types of treatment that actually are adding chloride to the system. Is that right, Joel? Is it chloride in salt?
Well,
Sodium chloride.
Chloride is, you know, I mean, it's when you're doing some of these treatment facilities, it's like, it's a brine solution versus the water, and you have stuff moving back and forth within it. And the sodium is what's attracting some of these constituents. But then you have the problem with the brine to get rid of.
Yeah.
Parker was looking at doing that, and they said the cost of getting rid of the brine and then putting it into a hazardous dump was just astronomical.
So, and then you also have application of groundwater and surface water that already has salt in it. You're applying that to agricultural lands. Water is evaporating off the land, but the salt stays in the soil. So over time, you just get an accumulation of salt. You're also bringing up some salts from groundwater, which they're just naturally occurring in bedrock. Water is picking up salt over time. And so you're pumping that up and putting it on the land, and again, getting this overall accumulation of salt, which can lead to water and land degradation and crop yield decline. So in the case of the South Platte River Basin, there hasn't been a whole lot of research done on kind of the trends of salt over time with, solid studies, and there's just been a little bit of anecdotal evidence. There's intermittent and limited data, and so we get the formation of this stakeholder group in about 2020. Just really about the need to get more research done and start talking more about this issue. They have a defined focus area. It was initially CDWC fund grant, kind of got the conversation going, got some research done. That was the Nearbo study that I just showed. They have a charter that was drafted. We're in the process potentially of revising that. I currently facilitate this group. It was facilitated by the Colorado Water Center at the start, and then Reagan Wascom retired, people moved on, and Northern Water staff was an interim kind of facilitating, and now it's turned back over to us. So where we're at now, we are really honing in on what is the purpose of this group and kind of what are our goals. We're bringing together folks to talk about concerns and needs. We're using those concerns and needs to really guide the research that's going forward. So it's an important part of this process is really to hear what the stakeholders are, what their issues are, what they want, and then have that inform the research versus researchers kind of just doing their own thing and having the results maybe are not as applicable to the stakeholders involved, and then using that to develop collaborative solutions. So we've got a whole range of stakeholders involved. We're trying to bring in some additional folks. I've been in touch with Ducks Unlimited. They're going to start participating in the meetings. We've got a good range of different stakeholders involved. But we're constantly looking to bring in more. I think we've talked about having more of an agricultural voice as well as the environmental side, because we didn't have any. We're bringing in some urban stormwater folks, because that's another part of the piece. You've got all of the salt supply in the winter, and that's going into the rivers and streams as well. So since I've come on board, I've really tried to bring people together to build more trust. All of the meetings, because the group started in 2020, they had all been virtual previously. So we've been doing some in-person meetings, just getting people to talk to each other and building an understanding of the different perspectives of this issue. I think there's always a tendency when you have a complicated issue like this, it's like, well, it's Aggie's fault. Well, it's the municipality's fault. It's, there's finger pointing and there's not enough research and it gets real messy real quick. So we've been going through this stakeholder process. We've got proposed roles for these different aspects of the group. We identified concerns and needs at one of our meetings, just doing a lot more participatory processes. This is our little process that I developed with support of the stakeholder group. This just kind of shows us that we have a defined process and it's not just willy-nilly research is going to be done and there's no kind of feedback with the stakeholder group. So We've got a technical team that helps to formulate these research questions and guidelines. The proposals will be reviewed by the technical team. Some of those proposals will have match funding. And then there's going to be this kind of peer review of some of the studies done, which in the past has not been done, has been kind of an issue. And then making sure that that information is being shared with the stakeholder group and that the data is accessible and usable. And we're kind of at the middle of that, trying to provide this unbiased coordination and facilitation. So I'm not going to get into all of these. These are the concerns and needs that were identified. We did this last April and partially June. So just kind of the different components of this issue, which include, you know, potential future regulation, water, the quality versus quantity factor, climate change, and then what are the impacts of the physical, economic, social, cultural, socio-cultural, and then what are the needs in terms of actually collecting the data, putting that data somewhere that's accessible, trying to characterize the whole extent of the problem and the sources and the trends, and then getting to solutions. So at this point in our process, we've done that whole concerns and needs kind of brainstorm. We funneled those into research questions, which will now be informing the research going forward. The first question is really about the sources and the concentrations of loads in the watershed. And it turns out that this is a very big question, and it involves lots of data collection and modeling, and so it's not an easy question to answer. And will require, you know, ongoing monitoring over time. That's where it becomes really important to make sure we've got good partners involved. I'm hoping that USGS will kind of step up and do some data collection in the future. I'd love for Northern Water, they already do some data collection, but to have more of an integrated collaborative approach, because it is a lot of data collection. And we've got teams from CSU doing this as well. And then what are the impacts of land and water management on salinity? So how is agricultural irrigation practices affecting salinity? If we're doing, you know, we're moving to higher efficiency systems and sprinkler irrigation, is that changing the way that salinity is being managed on land? And are we going to actually need more water to flush the system every now and then, as opposed to the sprinkler systems? And then what are the effects of the municipal and industrial water use and treatment on salinity? What are the impacts? Is it a problem now? For who? Like, there hasn't really been a lot of studies done. So a team from CSU is working with farmers right now to assess actual impacts to crop production in the lower part of the South Platte. And what are the future trends? When will it become a problem for, you know, municipalities as they're bringing water from the system back to their treatment facilities? And what are the short-term and long-term implications for species, groundwater, other states? So looking at the impacts, and then what are the mitigation and management strategies? So that's kind of our last piece of the puzzle. And Aurora Water, they're actually partnering with, South Metro Water Supply Authority. They are partnering together to do this. It's kind of like a pilot treatment for salinity. It involves like advanced ion exchange as opposed to reverse osmosis, so they don't have as much brine that they have to inject into deep groundwater wells. So it's a big complicated problem. I guess my main point here is the only way to solve big complicated problems is to get everyone in a room and talk together and figure out collaborative solutions. So that's what I wanted to talk about. And I will take maybe one question and then we gotta move on. So any questions? Yeah.
The study on the impacts of the salinity and what those implications are they just looking at salinity, or?
It's just looking at salinity, yeah.
And who is that with?
CSU? It's Tim Gates at CSU, yeah.
And so other than, I saw Aurora, I'm just trying to think of municipalities that might be helpful. It seems like Fort Collins seemed really, in their stormwater systems, would be helpful.
Yeah, we have not gotten into, like, so far, it's really been the big, like, Denver Water.
On the Platte.
Yeah, on the South Platte River itself, but they could be involved in the future.
Maybe in the future.
Have you guys talked, since this Northern Water is a part of this?
Yeah.
I've been at a presentation to where they were directly asked how a project that we've all heard about, and I think most of us would agree is gonna be super beneficial, being the NISP project with the alternating blade. They were specifically asked how that might affect salinity levels in the immediate area, from the farmers who are going to be maybe using that type of water versus what they've historically used. Do you have any better answer? Because quite honestly, when I heard them give an answer, it really wasn't an answer.
I do not have an answer. I know they're concerned about salinity. I think they're kind of at the point of like, let's have more research to understand what the current impacts are, if there are any, and then what the mitigation strategies will be, but I haven't heard anything about that specific.
They've hired a vendor, I can't recall off the top of my head, but correct, just to do the research part and then mitigation efforts downstream.
You have to imagine though, you're using
Yeah.
water coming out of the Pooter as opposed to South Platte after the confluence of the Pooter and from Daleton Reservoir, which would be the 900 TDS water bringing it up here. But that's some of the best water that we have is the 900 TDS water. We don't, on the upper edges of our area, we really don't have a problem with. It's when you get down into the Julesburg and Crook, kind of where the left, you saw the 1100 TDS down there, that's when you start getting into some issues.
But the aspect, and Karen already said, I have a lot of heartburn with TDS. Because it basically defines what's the constituents of that TDS. Because calcium's a salt, sodium's a salt, magnesium's a salt, but plants interact differently with those compared with sodium. Sodium is the one you gotta worry about, the big time. But we don't know what's this TDS, I mean, what are you talking about?
I've got a dumb question. I'm not exactly understanding where the salinity comes from. Is it just like the earth, like a geology? Is that the primary source?
It's a primary source. I think that I don't fully understand the wastewater treatment aspect of it, but I believe that can also add salinity to the system. But it's primarily like the bedrock and treatment and also the salt on the roads. Yeah. Okay, I think we need to move on to our next speaker. So Brett, come on down, do a little intro here. So Brett is president of Water Research. He brings close to 20 years of experience conducting a variety of engineering, economic, and water rights studies across Western states. Many of these projects have been focused on water resource management and water development concepts in the pursuit, protection, and use of water rights. Since joining Westwater, Brett has performed dozens of focused water right evaluation studies and broader economic and water market analysis, unique perspective to projects combining the background of water resources engineering with the developed knowledge of water rights and economics. And very excited to have you here today, Brett.
Thanks. Yeah, my pleasure. Hello, everyone. I'm between you and lunch. That's the reality of where I sit. I think the schedule had me talking for about 20 minutes and then about 10 minutes of discussion. I want to maintain that because there is no way I'm going to like talk to you for 20 minutes. I think the discussion is going to be a lot more interesting. So if you don't mind keeping me kind of on time, because I don't want to cut into our discussion time. All right, so water sharing agreements, formerly known as alternative transfer methods or ATMs. There's been a decision to change naming. It's fine. It's, you know, it's just kind of as we decide how to call these things. But I'll run through what the basic concept of these things are. These water sharing agreements provide some examples. We'll talk about barriers, why we haven't seen more of these despite fairly significant state investment in these over 15 years. Some complementary actions that municipal governments, county governments can take that don't really focus on the water side, but they're really getting at the heart of the issue, in my mind. And then current status, like where are we? Like, what have we seen? What are we doing? That's the outline of what I want to talk about. So I think what you have to understand, and I think you probably had an introduction to this, but I'll say it anyway in one quick slide. Most water use in Colorado is for irrigated agriculture. By the last USGS numbers, about 87% of us taking water out of natural sources, that's not consumptive use, if you understand that term, but of us taking water out of natural sources, that first use is for agricultural use, it's for irrigation. About 8% is for the cities, the towns, and everyone's faucets. So it's a large piece of how we use water in the state from a macro standpoint. And a lot of the water rights in our state, especially the best water rights in our state, are in irrigated agriculture. And it's because if you took a water law, I think, class in this course, first in time, first in right, it's how we've managed to allocate the resource of our state. Most of those first uses were irrigated agriculture. That was the economy of the state for decades when people were first drawing water out of the river systems. And so the best water rights in terms of reliability are often in irrigated agriculture throughout the state. So just that's sort of the backdrop of what I'm going to talk about. Just a quick map of irrigated lands. I like to show this map just to, I don't know, not be pessimistic, but do you kind of understand like that irrigated lands are following the river systems? So this is the South Platte River that's I'm tracing with my finger, right? Everywhere else outside of these river systems, this is the Poudre River, this is the Big Thompson, this is Carter Lake, St. Vrain's coming up here. Everywhere around these river systems, you see irrigated ag, right? You see irrigated agriculture. These little gray blobs are all the irrigated lands, and I'll just put a plug. If you ever want to just navigate around, the Colorado Department of Water Resources, or Division of Water Resources, they have an excellent map viewer. You can just poke around, click on water rights, download water right information. It's really cool. I really enjoy using it. Also just say like these cities, some of our oldest cities, Fort Collins, Loveland, Boulder, Denver's down here. Any idea why they established themselves right here? Because that's where the good farmland was and the river systems. And you know, for good or for bad, we are building on some of the best farmland in the state. It's just the natural progression of these communities established where the best farmland was, the best soils, the best access to water. Those are the cities that have grown. We are building on top of some of the best farmland in the state. So water sharing agreements. This is oversimplified, but I think it's helpful to understand that a lot of the ways we build homes in our state is by a permanent transfer of water from agricultural use to a municipal use. So a home builder says, I want to build 100 housing units. I need you to provide me permanent water service. The municipal utility says, great. You give me the water, or you give me enough money that I can go get the water, and I'll provide you permanent service to those taps. That is a one-time deal that is struck before the home is ever built. So it's really important about the permanence of that. The utility is not very comfortable saying, I will serve those homes forever. It's my obligation to do that if they don't have a water source backing that they feel comfortable is going to be there forever. The concept of water sharing from a home building perspective is, well, can that municipality not look at it so individual, not 100 homes, what's the water supply you're giving me? Can they look at it as like, they have a broad portfolio of water rights. Where are there holes in that water right portfolio that they could fill such that they feel comfortable serving those 100 homes, right? They don't have to get the most reliable water on a permanent basis to do so because they've got a broad portfolio of water rights. Can they just fill the goals or fill the holes, which is where this water sharing agreement idea comes in, where that water might be used in farming most years, but in dry years, in recovery from dry years, maybe there's a lease agreement of some fashion where the water is moving out of agricultural use and actually going to the municipal utility. So their whole portfolio, their water supply portfolio is more robust, right? That's the basic idea of these water sharing agreements. I will say, feel free to ask questions. as we go. So history on alternative transfer methods, that's sort of what these things were called, and going back to 2005 is really when these things got started. 2005, that is now 18 years ago. The state did a plan, a regular planning exercise, and the prediction was that we would lose 500,000 irrigated acres across the state due to these reasons. Urbanization, we are going to build on top of those lands. That's 100,000 acres. Municipal transfers, 200,000 irrigated acres. That's water moving from farming to municipal use for home building largely. And then other reasons, another 200,000 acres, augmentation needs, compact compliance, CRP enrollments, and groundwater overdraft. That's really Republican river basin heavy, but these needs, and also at this time in 2005, we were only 2 years after a major new event in the South Platte River system, which was groundwater curtailments. So these things added up to 500,000 acres. That was concerning. And so one of the things that came out of that was the state saying, well, and this was 2 years later in 2007, let's try to reduce this blue one. This isn't tied to water sharing agreements. This is not tied to water sharing agreements exactly, but this blue one, can we use water sharing agreements to reduce the amount of water transfers from municipal or from irrigated agriculture to municipal use? Then a grant program started, which I'll get into. A grant program started, the state started funding money, let's do research, let's do pilot projects, let's start to try out these water sharing agreements. And in 2015, they set a goal down of 50,000 acre feet of these ATMs or water sharing agreements by 2030. So this grant program that I talked about started in 2007. As of a year ago, the state had put about $8 billion into it. These dots are just each project, how much the project was and what kind of project it was. The colors there, kind of the colors here. So you can see before about 2015, a lot of those dots are blue. They were research projects. Jim, you had several projects down in your area with the Lower South Platte. Joe Frank had a project, I think. But a lot of them were research projects throughout the state. After 2015, the state has really wanted to focus on pilots. Let's not do as much research anymore. Let's try these things out in a more concrete fashion. So about $8 million has been awarded since 2007 to try these projects out. I'll run through, I think I have 3 examples that I'll run through. This one's goes by various names. I'll call it Little Thompson Farm, but basically Larimer County bought a farm right here near Berthoud. That farm was for sale. The landowners did not want to see it be that irrigated agricultural use. They didn't want to permanently sell it to a home builder. And so the county bought it, bought the land, bought the water. A big piece of the water that farmed that property were called CBT units, or Colorado Big Thompson Project units. It's water coming out of Horsetooth from Carter Lake. It's very valuable, highly sought after by the municipal utilities. And the intent of the county buying that property for $8.2 million was to try to develop a water sharing agreement. It was from day one, they bought that thing because they wanted to try to do a water sharing agreement. So they did, I can't remember if it was a year later or 2 years later, but a couple years later, they signed an agreement with City of Broomfield, which is down here. And the reason the water from here could make it down here is because the CBT system is pretty vast. There's a southern delivery pipeline on the Carter Lake. Actually, City of Broomfield is about the southern extent of that whole system. But there's a southern delivery pipeline that goes all the way to Broomfield. This is Carter Lake here. So the city of Broomfield, they worked an agreement. Broomfield paid $2.9 million to Larimer County to outright buy some of those units. So they bought some CBT units from that farm permanently, off the farm, never coming back, for $2.9 million. And they also paid, and then they paid $800,000 up front for a 3 and 10 year call on the rest of the CBT units that were on that property. So in any 3 out of 10 years, Broomfield can call the water off that farm to use for drought years, for drought recovery years. And they'll pay a lease rate of, $225 a unit if it's exercised. In the years that they don't make a call, that those CBT units stay on the farm property. The agreement's perpetual, and.
What does that mean?
Perpetual?
Perpetual.
It means it has no end date.
Oh,
There is no, it's not a 20-year agreement, it's not a 30-year agreement, it lives forever. Yep. Example in eastern Colorado, Jim can talk about this better than I can, but I'll do an okay job. This actually was prior to the grant program. I mean, this was something that came out of actually the groundwater management changes that happened along the South Platte. But Jim's irrigation district operates about 75,000 acre feet of water out of North Sterling Reservoir. And supplies about 41,000 irrigated acres. What happened was there's a power plant here, I want to say, just upstream of Jim's district, that needed wintertime water supply to augment their wells. And it wasn't every year. It was if there was ever a priority call, everyone was really on edge because there had just been some significant priority calls that curtailed a lot of irrigated acre in the lower South Platte. If there was a priority call, they needed a leased water supply that would be in the river, and they could use that to actually keep their pumps running for the power plant. So Jim's district, the North Sterling Irrigation District, set up an agreement with the power company, which was Xcel Energy, or Public Service Company of Colorado. And the basic terms were, they got a base payment of $50 per acre foot every year. They got a delivery payment of $425 per acre foot every time there was a call on that water. And these payments would escalate to CPI, and it was a 25-year term. And importantly, and Jim might speak to this if you're curious more, but they got 84% approval in their district to run this agreement. So Jim went to his members and said, do you want to do this? And they really, I think, overwhelmingly did. It was a good agreement. And in those years where, Xcel calls on the water, basically there's a reduced delivery. So it's not no delivery to those farms that volunteered to enroll, which was 84% of the district. It was a reduced delivery. So they got about 8.7, call it 9% less water in those years, and got paid for it. So that's an example in eastern Colorado. One more example? Oh, I got two more examples, so I'll go quick. An example in southern Colorado, this is what we call a rotational fallowing project. So this is the Patrick Canal pilot project. This has had a long history, which I won't go into, but this project started in 2015. It involves 6 farms totaling about 900 acres. And what they do is they actually provide water every year to the municipal partners, which is City of Security, I want to say, City of Fountain, Security Water District, and one other, which I'm not remembering. But they provide water every year, and how they do it is that they rotate which acres of the 6 participating farms is doing the fallowing that year. These rotational fallowing programs are pointed to as a way to provide consistent water to the municipal sector without permanently fallowing any one piece of ground. They rotate which actual field is being fallowed. So 30% of the acreage in each year is the maximum that can be fallowed, and it can't be consecutive years. So this started in 2015 and I think has a 30-year life on it. Basic payment structure, $150 per acre that's fallowed, paid every year, and $500 per acre foot to deliver water supply. One more example, which is a little different, it's on the west slope. It involves a ranch, a cattle ranch, and this ranch was purchased in 2012 by a group called Western Resource Conservancy. They partnered with the Colorado Water Trust to set up this water sharing agreement. It's not leasing it to another use, it's actually leasing it in stream. And the state, Colorado Water Conservation Board, is the one who paid for that in-stream use. So this particular creek had very dry late season flows that had some fish habitat concerns. And basically the CWCD paid for the option to call on the water in low flow years. So basically what happens is it's a split season lease. The green is continued irrigation. The blue is stopping irrigation and a lease to the river. So the idea with this lease is that in the early season, that ranch is going to continue irrigating their hay fields. They're going to get some forage production. They're going to get some cuttings or grazing. And in the late season, there's some trigger points based on the flows in the creek. In the later season, they will shut that irrigation ditch down. They won't get, as much production in the late season, but the stream's not going to be as impacted, and the state paid for it. So that's the idea of that water sharing agreement. I think I have 3 more things: barriers, other actions, and where are we? So barriers, there's lots, I will tell you, having worked on these types of things in different places around the state. The economic barrier is really about the interest between municipal partners and the ag partners. The municipal partners are really trying to have permanence. Permanent. If I'm gonna go build homes, I need to know what is permanently there. It doesn't have to be there every year, I just need to know what's permanently there. And that's really hard for ag producers to get behind. That I'm gonna permanently tie up this farmland forever. And probably more so than any other thing that's why these water sharing agreements are hard, is because we've seen a lot of value appreciation in water rights, value appreciation in farmland. To go to a producer and say, I need you to permanently lease water from your property, that's a hard sell. And in my experience, it's not hard sell with that person. They're happy to do a 10 or 20 year. They honestly don't want to saddle their grandkids with that deal, is what I've heard from a lot of producers. There's regulatory barriers in terms of water court. You face some of the same hurdles in terms of cost and time to do these water sharing agreements as you do to do a permanent change of the water rates. So those regulatory barriers that are inherent in our water law don't go away with these necessarily. Hydrologic barriers about where farmland is versus where the growth is happening. And then just comfort, there's reasonable trust issues. And so you've got to spend a lot of time to develop these things because they're new. And these 2 sectors, there's a little bit of rural urban mistrust, which is it's not terrible. It is what it is. It takes time to develop trust and develop these agreements. So some complementary actions to preserve agricultural lands, because as I talked about the genesis of these whole water sharing agreements, going back to that 2005 plan, it was, let's not have such a reduction in irrigated agriculture in our state. So what are some other things that can be done, trying to, not really focusing on the water side, but just the land management side? Agricultural conservation easements. So if you don't want to see the farms go out of farming, make sure they don't by putting an easement on property. Another one is municipal water dedication policy. So if you don't want to see as much farmland reduced, be very clear and strict about what water you're requiring new developers to build. Because the reality is developers at times have plenty of money. They will go find the water they need to build the homes. If we're really strict about, you're gonna build this housing product, I need this much water, it can have an impact on how much irrigated ground is dried up to build new homes. That involves density of homes, it involves, what are the land footprints of development, it involves all those questions of planning, but it does have an impact on irrigated land dry up in our state. And then finally, municipal water leasebacks. The common pattern we're seeing is municipalities are good at water planning, they have the resources, they're acquiring water to last through a very significant, let's call it 50-year drought. What that means is most municipalities have a surplus in average years. It's just the reality. They are acquiring water so that your faucets run in even very bad droughts. So in most years they have surplus. The amount of water leased from cities to farming is probably at least 10 times the amount involved in these water sharing agreements every year, or in average years. And so the question is, like, what can we do to make that water more reliable to the ag community and more attractive to the ag community? Because it is actually hard to farm off a leased water supply. So what could we do? Could we actually enter into some kind of longer term agreements from municipalities to ag? So those are 3 ideas that, I guess this one does involve water, but don't involve water sharing agreements as much. These are some complementary actions that I've thought about over the years that we collectively could be doing. So where are we at? I'll just point to this report that was done in 2020, came out in 2021, I believe. We worked on this with some partners for Colorado Water Conservation Board. I think we're gonna share these slides. If you click on that picture, it's a link to the report. But if you Google that name, it's also right there. But we did this report in 2020. The status is there's about 10 or 15 of these water sharing agreements active in the state. And then we provide some recommendations for advancing them. What I'm seeing is continued activity in the lower Arkansas River Basin. That's sort of Pueblo and east, down on the Arkansas River. Continued interest in doing these water sharing agreements from both the farm side and the municipal side. I think there's one being worked on right now. There was like one 2 years ago. There was one 2 years before that. There just seems to be continued interest in that area to continue to do these. And also for environmental and regulatory reasons. So the nonprofit community, especially on the western slope, is very active trying to engage the farming community out there to do these split season leases, to do water sharing agreements, all sorts of creative sharing agreements or water lease agreements that don't permanently remove water from ag, but are trying to hit upon critical habitat in certain streams or Colorado River Compact compliance, which is a whole big topic I don't really want to get into right now. But that's it. Happy to discuss and take questions. Great.
Questions? Yes, Deb. Is it too late to ask Thornton to water sharing?
Thornton's talking next.
Thornton will be here in like 20
Yeah, you
minutes.
can ask me.
That was an easy answer.
And we are leasing a lot of water to agriculture currently, and she'll talk about that.
Okay.
They bought those lands in the 80s.
Yeah.
And ever since
Yeah.
then, they've leased them back
Yeah.
to the farming community in that ditch system
For now.
for now.
Right. It looks pretty dry in Pierce.
You mentioned that this was basically kind of a gap supply for those systems that have a well-developed portfolio. So that also would be a constraint, correct? Because it would only really benefit those systems or those entities or those districts that really have a diverse water supply for which there could be a gap that they could backfill. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think you're right. And I don't think it's black and white, but that's how I kind of see these working better is if you're a young growing community, you kind of need that base supply that comes with permanent water right acquisition. To be honest, if you're a Fort Collins or a Boulder or a lot of the older cities that have acquired water for many years, I do think there's more opportunity for these lease agreements to fill some critical pinch point spatially, timing, whatever. So yeah, that's how I view it. And I don't think it's black and white, but I do think that's probably the best opportunity. The only thing I'd say is probably different than what I just said is these rotational fallowing agreements. They can provide year in and year out water. And there's examples in Colorado, there's examples in California. There's not many examples, but there are examples where that type of water management across multiple farm properties can provide a base supply. It just takes a lot of effort because you have to have a large acreage base to do it. Because you really don't want to be fallowing a field more than, call it 20 or 30% of the time.
Right.
So, and you just have to scale up your volume, so you're really talking 3-4 times the amount of acreage has to be involved in it to give you that base supply.
And just to follow up on that, just one last question. Are most of those conversations done out of relationships, or is there a place that you go that where people have indicated their willingness to do those following agreements?
To be honest, I think it takes a lot of funding to get started, which is why the state's grant program is really great, just to provide that kind of kickoff funding. But I worked on a project that lasted 3 years. We probably burned $100,000 and it didn't work out.
That's part of the inherent risk.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, but yeah, I think these things are very challenging unless one of the two parties has funding to bring in some consultant support. That could be attorneys, it could be engineers, it could be whoever. But to have the resources just to try to develop these things, because I don't think they're easy enough to just develop. I think you do have to fund them. So that could be a city taking the initiative and their funding staff. It could be grant money from the state. It could be a ditch system that found a windfall, right, Jim?
But they're kind of niche agreements because depending on what the demands are on the user side, can be, or probably vary each situation, right?
Oh, yeah, I would not say these things develop where you're like, let's develop the supply and then go find the other user. I think these things are very much developed cooperatively between seller and buyer, for instance, yeah. Yep. Yeah.
I have a kind of a question more related to maybe some of the non-water kind of, I don't know, cleaner things that can be done to kind of help fill gaps. One of them you had in there was conservation easements, and working in kind of the North Denver metro area and trying to do farmland preservation. What we found is some of the comps when you do conservation easements, and the farmers are trying to get out of the business because their kids don't want to do it. They're trying to set up estates and do succession planning and that kind of thing. But there's still a will and a want from local communities for those farms to continue farming. But as you know, we don't grow new farmers very easily nowadays, and farming is not easy, and I don't care what anybody says, it's extremely hard. They have a whole class on CSU to help people not be stupid about jumping into farming. I'm being dead serious, I mean, this is a, huge issue, but what we're finding is when you try to get a farmer to put in conservation, they're not making the money they would if they would sell to a developer. And I'm not gonna knock anybody for trying to make the most money in capitalist society, that's the way it works, but are there comps or are there situations that y'all have seen where maybe the farm came out better off than it would have been if it was in development, and kind of what is a good model for that? Because, Boulder County has a great conservation program, but unless you farm it, unless you use it, it just all gets kind of lost and then eventually absorbed into a giant metro area, what we're talking about in Portland. And they try for as long as they can, and then it just gets absorbed. So we're trying to find good models out there, and, it's not fast enough.
I would point you to Colorado Open Lands. I know several people there who, this is what they do day to day, is try to make conservation easements work in more urban settings and rural settings, wherever across the state. So they're a really good resource. I would say we're fairly fortunate in Colorado because there's a tax credit program where you can get 90% of the conservation easement value back as a tax credit. So I've had firsthand experience with this with an organization locally called Cooter Valley Community Farms that's trying to put farmers on land. But yeah, it's a benefit in our state, but I don't have a model, but I think Colorado Open Lands is a fantastic resource if you're curious. Just see what they say to that question. Yeah. I will also say, keeping farms in production that are isolated with urbanization around them is very challenging. Unless it's unique farm, a CSA, hobby farm, whatever it is, but have a sort of commercially viable farm surrounded by an urban setting, you're setting up a lot of hurdles.
I mean, that aspect of the farmer within an urban area is if they're using herbicides, pesticides, whatever, people around there start to get. Then you got the people that have to move the equipment around. The farm isn't one composite spot, it's here, it's here, it's here. And you talk to them, yeah, we're moving equipment at 2:00 in the morning because of traffic. Ugh.
You look at that on the animal side, there's smells, there's flies, there's manure management, there's stuff like that, so.
Sounds like you speak from experience.
What flies?
What is the damage to a fallow field over a long period of time? If you did exceed that 20-30%?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've heard various answers on that. So everything is soil dependent, a little bit. But if you leave a piece of ground, you're dealing with, weeds. Well, you're dealing with dust control and like weed management the year of, and then to bring it back into production, I've heard, you actually have to apply more water because you've completely, sort of desaturated the soil moisture profile in that field because there was no irrigation on it for some period. So I've heard, you might actually need to put 20 or 30% more water on. Your yields probably might suffer that first year back. So there's implications, economic implications to consider, not just the year you went out of production, but the year you came back in. And I don't have numbers off the top of my head, but I know they're real. And I'm just gonna go with a gut. I'd say like a 20 or 30% revenue hit per acre the year you're coming back in. That you should probably take into account when you're pricing, figure you're out. Yeah.
I'm just gonna ask one more, take up a question spot, which I'm not supposed to do, but what, given, CBWC's goal of the 50,000 acres in these ATMs, like, are they gonna meet that by 2030? Like, what is the projection for these water sharing agreements? Is it just gonna be like fall flat or?
No, in the report, we kind of give our estimate of where we're at and what more, like how far we're willing to go. The truth is, the state can play with the numbers and have already achieved that goal. So it'll be whatever they want it to be. And that's just the truth. It's like, you can play with how many of these have happened and what do you count as an acre foot? What does the goal mean? You can play around with the numbers enough to just decide where you are. I can't remember, but I think my estimate, which I felt was reasonable, actually our estimate, which I felt was reasonable, was like, we're somewhere around 25,000 acre feet of ATMs in our state. So we're like halfway there at this point, and that was 2 years ago. So I think there's been 2 agreements on the Arkansas system since then, which will add to that number. But I think if I'm remembering right, and it might not be, I think, yeah, we're somewhere in the high 20,000s of acre feet of ATMs in our state towards the 50,000 acre foot goal. Yeah. But like, what does the goal mean? I mean, to your part of your question, I don't really know.
Yeah.
I don't know where the state's going with the goal and like what their view of this is long-term. It does seem like they've shifted away from, this was originally a municipal ag issue, and it's broadened to be like, well, how can we use these water sharing agreements for various state issues, environmental, compact compliance, groundwater mitigation. It seems like they brought in the pool of like, how can we use these things? And it's not been so focused on land coming out of production because we're building homes.
Is there any talk of the state providing compensation for that loss in yield for fallowing land?
The state like funding the agreements?
Well, specifically, like if a farmer enters into a fallowing, like they do the rotational fallowing and they come back in and they're losing 20% of their production in that first year, do they get compensated for that, or can they get?
Well, they're compensated through the agreement.
Okay.
So like, if it's the city on the other side of that, the city should be paying more than just the lost year of production.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean,
It's all about the.
I would expect they should be paying 50 or 100% more than the last year of production, because you need enough money to motivate you to do it. You need enough money for the year after you're coming back into production. So that the funding, the payment from the buyer side should be more than enough to compensate all losses from the seller side. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we've done 2 of these on North Shore. Brett gave you one example of that. And I've also done a conservation easement on my property with the ability to lease off up to 30% of the water in any one year. So it's kind of, I've done a couple of things myself and then through the North Shore, but the reason they worked is because there was infrastructure in place to make it happen. So one of the big reasons somebody in Sterling's not gonna do a deal with Fort Collins, you have no way to get the water. Brett made that point when it's the location. We get compared to Australia or California where farmers can lease the water. Well, they're all downstream of the farms and it makes it easier. You can release the water, it goes down to the city. We're down here, you're up here, and then you have the water quality component. And so, but the infrastructure is probably the main thing. And the reason ours worked is the power plant was in Brush. It was the next upstream water right in the winter. So they looked downstream and they said, hey, North Sterling, do you want to do a deal? And that's how it all started. And then we just started negotiating and it didn't take that long. So it's one of those where it's kind of an interruptible. They've never had to use any water. They just pay us the minimum. We're like an insurance policy. And that's what farmers are willing to do that kind of stuff. Plus we did some unique things. I think we created a limited liability company to do the deal, and then farmers tied their water up through the limited liability company to the agreement. And that way it made everybody do it voluntarily. So no farmer had to do it. No farmer had to do it anytime, but it was all voluntary. And if you signed up, then your water's gonna, if it needs to be, then you can call for it and they can use it that way.
Do these agreements all go through the water courts? They do?
No, not the agreement itself, But like, we had to change our water right in order to allow, because our water right was for irrigation. Now we're gonna use it for industrial use, and so we changed it to use it for an industrial use. So we had to go through water court, change the water right, and we did that in the early 2000s. So we had to do that, but it's paid off because we changed enough of it that now we've done another deal. And, you know, we've a windfall from these two deals to our